for 1 second.
There we go.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. Welcome, everybody. May I remind everyone present that this meeting will be live streamed and recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a committee member wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen, or use the hands up option on the application? I've got the people thing up on mine, so I'll see it if you put your hand up on screen. If you put your hand up on the app. If you have a webcam, you should try. If you have any difficulty hearing or being heard, then you should let myself or Democratic Service Officer know as soon as possible. If you have a webcam, you should try turning that off in order to help the bandwidth or broadband, so at least you can hear and be heard. If required, participants can dial into the meeting using a telephone. Telephone numbers were provided with the invitation. If for any technical reason any person party to the proceedings is unable to hear, then the hearing will be adjourned for a short time to allow contact to be made. It's important to remember that all parties must hear all the proceedings unless they themselves decide to leave. If you don't hear all the proceedings, then you're not entitled to vote at the when it comes to that. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function can be used to highlight any technical issues and or to grab the attention of myself or the Democratic Services Office only. And the allocated public speaking minutes will be strictly adhered to. Right. Moving on then with the agenda. Part 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We had apologies received from Councillor Cow this evening.
Okie doke. Thank you for that. Minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of June. Can I sign those as a correct record?
Yes,
Move,
Chair.
Thank you very much. I take it that's moved and seconded then. Received declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest?
Oh, hi, Neil.
Ian, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to application item 9, planning application 2021-00622/FUL, I've previously made comments and contributions to committee in my role as comments as a ward councillor and spoken on this application previously. As with all applications, I will be considering this with a fresh pair of eyes today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Ian Perry.
Yeah, there's obviously a few applications today in my community council ward. One, I do know the residents because obviously I've canvassed them at election time, but that makes no difference to me. And then there are 2 where I reported them to enforcement for the change of roof tiles, which I reported for 10, 12 and 13 Duffering Close, 2 of which have come forward today.
Right. So
that was a long time ago. That was reported to me as a change, but yeah, it doesn't change how I see that.
Right. Can I take advice from the legal department, please, on that, James? Are you here, James?
Yeah, I'm here. So go on.
Is Ian Perry entitled to stay and contribute, or should he step out?
It's up to Ian as to whether he feels that what's happened is given here is put him in a position where he's got a prejudicial interest in the matter. I don't think necessarily on the face of it directly, but it'd be for Ian to make that decision.
That's okay. Thank you very much for that. Helen, you've got your hand up. Muted. Helen, you're muted.
Sorry, on application 2021-00622 FUL 81 Holton Road, 81 to 85 Holton Road. I'm a member of Barrytown Planning, and so I will look at this with a fresh pair of eyes.
Very good.
Thank you.
Right. There being no other hands up that I can see. Well, Ian and Helen, please take your hands down. I see no new hands up. We'll move on. Item 4, building regs. Who's presenting on this? Oh, nobody. Can we take these as read?
Yes, Chair, move that they're taken as read.
Right. Move Sandra,
Second.
seconded Eddie. Planning applications determined by head of regen and planning under delegated powers. Everyone happy with these?
Yes,
Yes,
Chair.
Eddie and Sandra again. Right, we move on to appeals. I think Sarah, you're presenting on this, please. You're muted, Sarah.
Sorry. Yeah, it's just for members to note the appeal decisions. There is just one update in relation to the visitor pod at Tower Hill Residential Home. That pod has now been removed. So following the decision, we contacted them and it's been removed. So just an update on that.
Yeah, I walked down there the other day when on Holiday Festival. We'd walked past it and noticed it had gone. Thank you for that. Right, item 7, trees. The delegated list. Can I take that as noted and read? Yep, everyone happy? Christine, you have your hand up. Christine Cave.
Yes, sorry, Chair. I just want to report that one of our councillors is having trouble at the moment entering the meeting. I don't know if somebody from Democratic Services can help, Gillian.
Absolutely, Councillor. We'll make sure that she can connect now. Bear with me for 1 second. We'll make sure she can get online.
Sorry, Chair, can I just say that I've put a message in the chat as well for another councillor having difficulty.
I think Councillor Drake is also having a problem.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll follow up on that. Thank you.
Please. Right, thanks, Christine. Can you put your hand down? Right, moving on then to enforcement. The land and buildings at land behind the properties of Holland Cottage, the Sycamores and Old Cops, Llantwit Road, St. Athan. Sarah, this is you again.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the land is located to the north of Llantwit Road in St Athan. It's just under 1 hectare of agricultural land and divided into 3 fields and accessed via a private lane to the west. There's residential properties to the south, east and west of the agricultural land and a yard to the north. As a result of investigating a complaint, the land was found to be storing a variety of construction items, plant and machinery, which are detailed in the report. The eastern field in particular is being used as a principal storage area, including rubble, building waste. Other fields to the south and west contain similar items, materials and pallets, as you can see in the photographs. During the process of investigating matters, the owner has applied for a lawful development certificate, but has failed to demonstrate to the council that the land has been used for the storage of materials for in excess of 10 years, and the application was therefore refused. So we consider it expedient to issue an enforcement notice in this case, as the existing unauthorised use of the land has resulted in a high volume of construction goods being stored on the land and also a material change of use. So the nature and appearance of the stored goods that you can see in the photographs is commercial. It results in the loss of agricultural land, is detrimental to the character of the area, and is visible and detrimental to residential properties and contrary to policies of the LDP. So if further action is not taken, then we are concerned that over time the use of the land would become lawful. So we are recommending enforcement action in this case. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Any comments? Anybody got questions? Anybody? I see no hands. I see no comments. I assume then everyone is happy with the recommendation on this.
Yes, Chair.
Yep. Nobody opposed.
Yes.
That's fine. We'll take that as read. 8.2 land and buildings at 101 Port Road West. Barry, now this I understand the application itself has been withdrawn. However, the enforcement part of it, I think, remains. Is that right?
Yeah, no, sorry, with this one, this was
No,
only...
not this is a different one. Sorry, this is one of the responses. Yeah, I apologise. This is one of all the responses. But Sarah, if you'd like to take us through this, then it's a different one.
Thank you, Chair. So the dwelling is located in the settlement boundary and faces onto Port Road West, but also has a frontage onto Highlight Lane. So in November, just as a bit of a background, in November 2020, we granted planning permission for a 2-storey side extension with conditions requiring the roof of the extension to match the existing brown tiles found on the main house. And there's also a further condition that the permission did not include the 1.8 metre wall shown in the original scheme adjacent to the highway. At the end of April 2021, the owner asked the council if she could change the roof tiles to grey slate and was advised that planning permission would be required to change the tiles on the extension and the main dwelling. It was also advised, or the council also advised, that we may have concerns in regarding the grey slate, as they would look different to the remainder of the street. So as a result of investigating the complaint, it was identified that a boundary wall had been erected up to 1.8 metres in height, and the roof of the extension and the main dwelling had been replaced with grey cement tiles, contrary to the planning consent. The owner was advised in September 2021 that the development had been undertaken in breach of plan control and was considered to be unacceptable and advised to stop work. Despite the fact that the owner was advised that the wall would be retained at a height of 1 metre and planning application submitted, the wall has been retained at 1.8 metres and further works undertaken to complete the development. So we consider it expedient to take enforcement action in this case, as the grey roof tiles used on the main roof and extension provide a stark contrast to neighbouring properties and are not in keeping with the character of the area. The 1.8 metre high wall also results in the loss of an open character of the street scene, which you can see the original dwelling in the photograph there, and that's considered to be unacceptable as well. So the colour and finish of the roof tiles and height and alignment of the boundary wall are considered harmful to the character and appearance of the dwelling and surrounding area, and also contrary to policies of the LDP. The enforcement notice proposed will require the roof materials on the main dwelling and extension to be replaced with materials to match the colour and texture of the original dwelling, and also the reduction in the height of the boundary wall to 1 metre. I'm aware, Chair, that the owner of the property has also submitted supplementary information which has been distributed to members. In respect of the roof, she's advised that she was advised by a roofer that the artificial slate would be a preferable due to it being lighter and more durable. And also, as the original Marley roof tiles had a 20-week wait and the roof was exposed to bad weather, so they were unable to wait for the original tiles. And in respect of the wall, the owner has advised that she's tried to keep the garden wall to 1 metre, but this has resulted in security issues for her. She also confirms that several neighbours who were spoken to are happy with the wall and roofing materials, and this is confirmed in the 4 accompanying letters that have been submitted, which confirm that the wall provides privacy and security for the owner. There's also a letter from the builder who completed the work on the roof, confirming that there was a 20-week wait for the original roofing materials. So notwithstanding this information, the works have proceeded contrary to officers' advice, and we're recommending enforcement action be taken. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any Councillor Champion? I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, I'm not a party to all the. I looked at the planning drawings, and nowhere on the planning drawings does it state what the roofing materials are going to be. And in the planning officer's report, they refer to the render and brick. They do not refer to the roofing material in the planning report.
Chair, would you like me to respond to that?
Yes, Sarah, please.
There is a note on the approved plan which refers to the existing proposed materials to match the existing roof. So that is in the bottom left-hand corner of the.
If you look at that, it says existing materials and existing materials.
Which were at the time the Marley tiles.
Yeah, existing materials to match existing materials. So the existing materials were the brown cement tile, and the extension was to match that material. So they were both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ian, you have your hand up.
Oh,
Ian Johnson, that is.
Thank you, Chair. So I do think we need to make sure we distinguish between the various.
I will call you Councillor Johnson.
Quite a few of us on the call today. Just a quick comment, because it seems coincidental, the juxtaposition of this as an enforcement action with a number of the items that we're discussing later on today, which are regarding roofs. It says that correspondence received from the Council's Housing Department states the rationale for replacing roof tiles with Marley Ashmore tiles was a result of a shortage of supply of the original tiles, and the production of these tiles would result in a substantial delay. With all respect to the obviously the issues regarding the boundary wall and permitted development, it seems quite strange that we have items coming to this very committee meeting where our council department is explaining that why we as a council couldn't maintain our high standards in a conservation area, but there's an enforcement action being brought against a private resident on a admittedly, I think the photographs look of that part of Port Road West and Highlight Lane look very nice with the tiles, but as our own reports say, we're saying that we couldn't do this during the pandemic, and we're also saying that the replacements couldn't be like for like anyway because of the weathered nature of these in St Nicholas. So really, I'm just highlighting what seems to be sort of that juxtaposition of and that tension between we're saying that it's okay for us in a conservation area in St Nicholas, but not for a private resident in Barry. I do hope, and I'm sure I've seen it in the paperwork, that the applicant wants to have further discussions about this and has made reference to their own personal situation. But I just wanted to highlight that tension because it seems that we're facing both ways at the same time on this. Thank you, Chair.
I take that point, but as I understand it, I think we're asking for the we as the planning committee, as opposed to we as the council, are looking at this rather than. I'm looking at it from the point of view of the planning committee, not from the point of view of the council. Ian Robinson, you put your hand up to respond to that, I think.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to add that obviously I don't want to go too deeply into the merits of the three applications later on the agenda, because that will be for then, and this one has to be taken on its merits. But there is a much clearer, stark difference between the tiles on this roof at 101 Port Road West and the neighbouring property in the street scene. I think, again, without going into too much detail, the rationale in the reports later on is that whilst they're slightly different, actually they are in their own right acceptable because of the similarity to the adjoining roof plane. In this case, they are starkly different, and I would say that it's a materially different comparison.
Yeah, apples and pears. Sandra Perks.
Thank you, Chair. I think I was going to sort of say something what the planning officer just saying. Now, I think each item that we have in here is taken on its own merit, and basically they haven't complied with the approved plan. So I think we have to take it on board on that. You know, if you've been given permission to build something, then you have to go with what the planning officers have recommended. You can't just make up your own mind and decide that you're going to go your own way. So yeah, I'm of a mind to not actually, sort of, I don't support the householder and what they've actually done.
Yeah. Thank you, Sandra. Councillor Perry. Ian Perry.
You can see me, but you can't hear me. I'm here now. The question I've got really, it's really a question for Sarah, is when would it be acceptable to change a roof? Because obviously this isn't a conservation area or a locally listed building. It's just a house, and I'm not going to say anything that's just Barry, but it's just a house on a. I don't know how old the house is. It's nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary. So when would it be acceptable to change the colour and profile of a roof tile?
Well, the permitted development rights do enable changes to be made, but there are conditions that require the materials to match what is there existing. So if they had, changed the roof tiles and what they'd put back had been a match of the previous tiles, then that would be acceptable. Because there is a change in material and colour, they don't match the original building materials. So that is a condition in the permitted development rights, which they haven't complied with. So which is why planning permission is required.
Can I just can I add as well? I think it is really each case on its merits, and it depends on each street scene. So many contexts and street scenes will just display enough variation that you'd say, well, changing the original material to something different isn't harmful in that context. I think in this case, we are of the view that there's such a sort of striking uniformity to the row, and actually that uniformity really contributes to a pleasant character, and it contributes positively to the street scene. So whilst it's not a conservation area, something doesn't need to be a conservation area to have a level of uniformity which contributes positively. So our view was interrupting that uniformity with something so different in this case is harmful. It may be that another house in Barry in a different context could change their tiles similarly, and it wouldn't have that impact because there's not such a strong degree of continuity. So it's hard to say, when would we do it? It really does rely on an assessment of each case on its merits.
So it's because it's the first one in the street or locality. So if another house has already done it, or other houses have changed their roofs from the original tiles, then it would be okay. I mean, does the fact that it's a semi-detached house rather than a detached house play a role in that as well?
In my mind, it probably does make it slightly more harmful because it's got, there's a continuous relationship between the roof planes. So if it was detached, it's probably less harmful in my view. Yes, if hypothetically 5 or 6 out of a row of 8 had already done it, you'd say, well, it's probably not an issue. And we unfortunately we can't look at it as being the first one and then that might encourage more people to do it, because if nobody then does do it, that rationale falls down. So it's difficult to take that stance with it, really.
As Ian Robinson says, we have to look at this on its as this application and within the context of the estate. Eddie Williams, you had your hand up next. Well, actually, no, Marcus, I've got you up next.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I did, but I'd rather
you
Marcus
went down
speak.
And, yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
Sorry, yes, it was just to add to obviously the discourse between Councillor Perry and Ian, and obviously in this particular instance, what's probably making the situation worse is that the contour of the materials used and the depth is significantly different. So had concrete tiles, even if they were slightly different to those that were on the roof previously being used, it would have been a case of considering the merit of enforcement action or what have you, but the likelihood is that the impact would have been less, particularly if the material colour was similar. The issue here is obviously in using substitute slates, you are talking about a significantly thinner material, lighter material, and the impact it has in terms of the difference is considerable. I mean, you often see terraces, for example, with slightly different concrete slates, slightly different concrete tiles put on, or slightly different even slates put on some of the older terraces. But in those instances, it's often the case that the merits of any further action would be limited. Obviously, in this case, due to the setting, it is the fact that it hasn't happened elsewhere. It is a semi-detached property, and therefore you get this distinct contour difference between the concrete tiles and the or clay tiles if they're I think they're concrete tiles, and the simulated slate is significant, and it has quite an impact. So just to add to the fact that it's not just colour or even design, it is in this particular case the fact that the simulated slates themselves are significantly slimmer and introduce an alternative contour to the roofs.
I'm just thinking next, I could probably give you an example of a plan application where the whole street was concrete brown tiles, and then someone did a large extension and re-roofed the house with a much thinner, almost sort of plastic dark grey tile. So yeah, and that was just outside of conservation area as well. So things like this have happened in the Vale of Glamorgan and have been given planning permission in the past.
Sure, they have. Yeah, and I think it's that. As I say, it comes down to the context they're within. And you know, being brutally honest here, you could find that if the person were to appeal, for example, an inspector may take a different view. But I think in this particular instance, where you have such a clear position, the council really has to, you know, as I think Ian Robinson said previously, where you have I feel like a set of materials that have been used in the past and they haven't changed, you know, it is really bound upon us to try and keep that materials as matching. One final point, obviously, and Sarah referred to the permitted development rights around changes to roof materials and roofing. Obviously, the reason for saying that the material should match is that this very issue that you can have a strange situation if you start to have all sorts of differing materials in street scenes. I'm sure all of us have seen that happen. And that's the reason why it was clarified in the General Permitted Development Order in that way, is that it gave councils the power to, if necessary, intervene. It's worth noting, actually, that up until relatively recently, councils didn't tend to do that, which is why you have these situations where roofing materials have changed quite significantly on other buildings. But you know, case law established that this is covered, and it's now clearly set out in General Permitted Development Orders. So it is worth setting that out as well, that in the past, you know, change of roofing materials may not have been considered in quite as much detail, and that legislation has actually clarified that in terms of the way it has been written.
Thank you, Marcus. Right, moving on, Eddie.
Yeah, taking into consideration all the discussion and recognising that, yeah, it's unfortunate the applicant has had the roof exposed during this, and therefore has been directed to go for this change. But really, that isn't a justification. The plans were clear, and preparation of material should have been available prior to the removal, I would suggest. And really, that doesn't make a good enough argument for me. The change on scene is probably a key one. As you know, although you may have some individuals that have supported the applicant, I would suggest that generally it changes the street scene and changes the next door neighbour property. So I would move the officer's recommendation.
Do we have a second?
I'll second the officer's recommendation. Thank
you, Sandra. Councillor Johnson.
Just briefly, Chair, could I just confirm, I mean, because I'm sure that the householders will be watching this, just confirm what happens as a result of the enforcement action. They have the opportunity to appeal, as that suggested, and to as well as engaging with their officers.
Yes,
Absolutely.
there is. Yes, once the notice is issued, there is the right of appeal.
Yep. So in that case, unless I see someone put their hands up to the contrary, I will take officers' recommendations as agreed. Nobody disagreeing. Thank you very much. Then that's passed. Or the officers' recommendations are passed. Right, moving on to item 9, planning applications. First one up is 81 to 85 Halton Road. I'm aware that we've got 2 speakers on this. And I think, Ian, you're presenting on this as well, aren't you?
Yes, Chair, that's right. Thanks. Yeah, as you mentioned, we have got some speakers, so I'll try not to talk for too long and go into too much detail, because I dare say some points may be covered and there may be some debate on it. Just a summary for members. This is an application that's been before Planning Committee twice before, once prior to the elections and a couple of months ago for the benefit of this committee. When the application was reported to committee originally, Just this is for context, the applicant was Cadwyn Housing Association, who don't benefit from the exemption in the council's affordable housing policy because they're not one of the council's 4 partner RSLs. Accordingly, there was a resolution to approve the application subject to a Section 106 legal agreement that made provision for various contributions. When the application was reported to committee last time, members may recall the applicant is now Havard Housing Association, who are one of the council's 4 partner RSLs, and consequently the recommendation to committee was that if the development were being built out by Havard or one of the other partner RSLs or the council, that the Section 106 requirements should not apply because that's in line with the council's affordable housing policy. When members voted last committee, they voted not to agree to change the resolution, and consequently the resolution effectively remained as was. Since the last committee, that's been reported back to the applicant to understand their stance. Their stance is that they cannot agree to the Section 106 contributions. So for that reason, this is why the application is reported back to committee today, because essentially members will need to make a decision as to whether the application is approved with the recommended amendment to the original resolution to allow the Section 106 exemption, or to refuse the application. Now, in terms of the updated report, members will notice that notwithstanding the resolution last time, it remains officers' recommendation that the application be approved with the Section 106 exemption, because that's in line with the council's affordable housing policy. In terms of the report, members may note that the number of people on the waiting list in Buttrell has been amended from 558 in the original report to 469 now, which is still significant need, still critical need. The difference is because non-respondents to the questionnaire have been taken off the list. Now, that's not to say that those people are no longer in need, but because they haven't responded, they're not on the list. But notwithstanding that, there's still critical need in the ward. Members will also have noted that in the report there is some figures just to try and give some context to affordable housing delivery on wholly affordable sites pre that policy in September 2016 and post, and the numbers show that before the policy was in place, there was just briefly 21 and 57 and 15 units approved. Of the 57 in 2015, that was 2 sites, both with reduced 106 packages because of viability. And then since the policies come into effect, there's been 40 odd, 221 in 2018, 104 in 19, 14 in 2020, and then 85 in 21. So that's just designed to give members some context of how affordable housing delivery on these kinds of sites has been going before and after. And I think just the last thing really to add before we go to the speakers is I just wanted to read out section 11.4 of the affordable housing SPG, because it does summarise quite nicely, in my view, the position and the reason for the policy. It says, it is recognised that the lack of Section 106 financial contributions for matters such as sustainable transport, public open space, community facilities and education will inevitably lead to pressure from future residents for those service areas to meet their needs through their own budgets as service providers. However, there is a critical need in the Vale of Glamorgan for affordable housing, and previous research has shown that if a person does not live in a stable and good quality home, it can have a detrimental effect on both their health and educational attainment. Therefore, this is a policy decision to prioritise affordable housing over other service areas. I just wanted to read that out because it's relevant context, and nobody is pretending that there aren't other service needs that residents would need, but it is just to give context that notwithstanding that, it's because affordable housing need is so great that the decision has been made to prioritise it. That's all I wanted to say, Chair. I'll be happy to move to the speakers now.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Champion, I'm not calling you in now. It's normal for us to take the speakers now, and then the committee can raise clarification points with the speakers after they've spoken,
Okay.
and then we get into the debate.
Yes, I put my hand down.
I would if I were you, yeah. I mean, if you want to, it would save confusion. If you want to ask points of clarification from either of the speakers, then you may do so at that time by putting your hand up, as can anybody else. The first speaker is going to be John Hurley, you're going to have 3 minutes, John, to speak when you, the time will start when you start speaking. Mark, our Democratic Services Officer, will chip in about 1 minute to go to remind you that you have 1 minute to go. When you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair and members. As you'll be aware, this application has been recommended for approval by officers with no Section 106 financial contributions in accordance with the Council's Affordable Housing SPG. It will deliver 25 affordable homes for the Harvard Housing Association and is an opportunity to bring back into use this prominent building and go some way towards meeting, as quoted in the committee report, the acute housing need in Barry. As we have just heard, currently on the council's waiting list, there are just under 500 applicants in the Buttrell ward alone. As we've heard as well, following the committee that started June, where it was agreed that Harvard would not be allowed the usual commonplace exemption from planning obligations, and a payment in the region of around £200,000 would be required. Their position was clarified in the letter that was submitted on the 4th of July. The key sections of the letter are as follows, and it's actually within your committee report at Appendix B. Harvard are one of the council's 4 housing association partners. One of the key priorities is to work with the council to increase affordable housing delivery across the Vale in order to meet the significant affordable housing need that there is. The redevelopment of this site is a key part of that agenda. The approach of the council to 100% affordable housing schemes such as this, and that they can be exempt from paying financial obligations, is welcomed. This policy, which we have just heard, is set out within Section 11 of the Council's Affordable Housing SPG. It is clear in that the Council have taken the decision to maximise the use of council funding to prioritise the delivery of affordable housing. This results in the delivery of a greater level of affordable housing than would otherwise be the case. So in summary, on this basis, Harvard are respectfully requesting no planning obligations should be required. The June resolution was contrary to the recommendation of planning officers and the council's planning guidance on this matter, and if followed through would negatively impact the delivery of affordable housing. Accordingly, we therefore request that the planning application is approved by members in line with the council's SPG, which requires no financial Section 106 contribution for 100% affordable housing developments such as this. Thank you.
I'm muted now. Thank you, John. Are there any points of clarification from any members of the committee? I see no hands. In that case, thank you, John. If you would like to mute and go dark, and we'll move on to the next speaker, who is Nick Jones, who's also speaking for the application. Nick, the same applies to you. You've got 3 minutes, and Mark will chip in when you've got a minute to go, just to let you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There are huge costs associated with funding temporary accommodation. Sorry, I'll start again. The council's statutory responsibilities in assisting people who are homeless. Where it's not possible to prevent homelessness, the council is required to provide temporary accommodation and assist households until they can access more permanent accommodation. At this time, there are around 200 households living in temporary accommodation, including B&Bs, hostels, HMOs. This is in addition to a large number of households who are at risk of homelessness. They've been served a notice by their current landlord to stay with family members, often in wholly inappropriate accommodations. There are huge costs associated with funding temporary accommodation. And last year, the council paid it cost over £2 million to accommodate single homeless people into B&Bs alone. If new homes are not developed, the number of homeless people will increase, as will the cost to the council. There is another statutory requirement on the council, that is to act as strategic enabler to support the local housing market so the needs of vulnerable people can be met. This includes increasing the supply of social rented accommodation, so homelessness is rare, brief and not repeated. We do this by supporting RSLs to develop social housing. We also do this by building new council homes. We have a strong track record in delivering new homes, converting existing buildings and bringing unused buildings back into use. Recent examples include the new flats at Subway Road near the docks offices and the 3 former pub schemes in Barry, which together are providing much needed accommodation for over 100 households. The partnership agreement in place with RSLs, which exempts RSLs from the 106 contributions on smaller sites, supports the council to meet its key objective of delivering new homes. The agreement also supports the council in delivering its own house building programme, particularly on smaller brownfield sites in town centres where there's limited land, high costs and competition from others. Over the next 5 years, our development programme is on target to lever in more than £100 million of investment and deliver around 800 new homes. This is predicated on current levels of social housing grant, maintaining the existing planning requirements, and also continuing to work with existing council policies like the Affordable Housing Partnership Agreement. Changes to these will result in less investment, fewer social rented homes, higher levels of homelessness, and increased costs to the council of providing temporary accommodation. On that basis, the housing team in the council would like to support the scheme and the retention of the existing council policy exempting partner RSLs from 106 agreements on smaller sites. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. All right. Again, are there any points of clarification from members of the committee for Nick? I see none. In that case, thank you very much, Nick. You too can now mute and go dark, and we will carry on with the discussion. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, my hand's not working. Oh, no, it's not.
It is now. Right.
One piece of clarification. There are 200 households in temporary accommodation in the Vale. How many of those 200 households would this development house?
There's 25 properties on this development, isn't there? And the majority of those would go to homeless people.
That will happen then. It wouldn't just be other people moving and shifting. Okay.
No.
Right, Helen, is this a point of clarification? Helen Payne?
No, I wanted to make a point.
You want to make a point? In that case, if you hang on a sec,
yes.
Are there any other points of clarification? I assume not from the no other hands up. In that case, Nick, you can now go dark and mute. Thank you very much for your time. Right, Ian, do you want to come back on any of that, Ian Robinson?
No, thanks, Chair.
That's okay then. Right, moving on then. Charles Champion, you is your hand up now to make your point in the discussion? Chair. Right.
I just wonder whether there's any scope, Chair. I know there's a 200,000 that was the figure to have that reduced. It sounds like there was a previous quota. Was there? I don't know. That reduced 106. And 200,000 is quite a lot of money, but. Is there any scope to go back to the 106 officer and renegotiate that?
That's not what we've been presented with in the application. The officer's recommendations is to pass it without Section 106 at all. The reason why there was Section 106 on the originally agreed.
No, I know that, but I think previous to the cabinet coming to the agreement of no. There was a reduced. Was there a reduced 106 for? And I could form a motion to say, can we defer this and look at reducing the 106? No.
I don't think. No. I don't think that's something that'll work now.
Sorry, just I could clarify. The query has been put to the applicant, and just I just want to say, committee. The time of deferring going back, it won't change anything. The applicant's position is that there's not scope for that. So it's I think we do need to make the decision on the proposal as it is. Just on that point, we haven't got a detailed viability exercise, but the point is even if there were a reduced package, all that would mean is that dents what could be provided in terms of affordable housing, whether on this side or through the Vale. So that's why officers wouldn't recommend that approach anyway, because it's our view is it's about the policy and it's about prioritising affordable housing, and any 106 whatsoever on this site would dent affordable housing provision effectively.
Absolutely. Helen, your hand up is your
hand
is up now. Thank you.
It is. Thank you. So I just wanted to make a point about costs, really. Potentially, you've got 46 people here that are taken off the homelessness list. So you've got people like Nick had said, a few of the points I wanted to make was about reducing the homelessness in the Vale of Glamorgan, and that lots of people, there's a major issue with people moving out of TA into affordable housing, into suitable housing, and these are 1 and 2 bed, and these are what we most need. So I'm kind of, that's the tip of the iceberg also, because we're looking at hidden homeless also. So these are the people that are just registered, that we know about. So there are lots of other people that need housing. So, we're looking at moving from TA into affordable housing. So I'm kind of for it. So for me, it's a bit of a no-brainer, really. On balance of costs, on loss of 106, or housing 46 people who potentially are costing the council much, much more money, So that would be my take, really. Thank you,
Councillor Payne. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've just got a few issues. Obviously, I still think lots of members are new onto this council and they don't always understand how 106 works. But basically, lots of areas where we have 106 are designed where we have developments where there's insufficient affordable housing, and therefore that goes to a contribution to 106. And because 106 is basically what we are often known in layman's terms, is what we call planning gain. And really, there's no real planning gain here. And that's why I feel, officers are right to recommend this. This is 46, as Councillor Helen Payne rightly said. We have a desperate need for housing in the Vale of Glamorgan, especially affordable housing. And this will help fulfil this. So I'm really support officers' recommendations and like to propose that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I think it would be appropriate, it's normally accepted, that the first person to speak on an item should be the local member, particularly when it's a controversial application like this. This is the 3rd time that it's been in front of this committee, and twice before this committee has said that it supports the application, but with the section 106 funding attached. It's very strange and quite unusual in my experience. 5 years on the planning committee, 10 years on the Vale Council, following planning matters very closely. It's quite unusual to have such a very quick turnaround in terms of something being agreed by this committee. And on the basis that we should negotiate the section 106, and then it being returned quite so quickly to us. Firstly, and just very briefly, I will note that one of the previous speakers, I believe, works for a homeless charity, and while that's great work that I'm sure that they and the charity do, I'm not sure it's entirely appropriate for them to be talking about the specifics of something within the area where they operate. I'd consider that to be a conflict of interest, even in the best, if they're in their contributions with the best intentions. I do think that it's quite strange that we are coming back to this issue once again regarding what is actually a relatively small amount of money on the section 106 funding that's here. We're talking about the region of £200,000. Now, Havard Housing, with the best will in the world again, and not a mom and pop organisation. They're one of our 4 RSLs. They're a large organisation, £60 million turnover last year, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of assets. This is not a small organisation, and this is a relatively small amount of money within that wider amount that they are contributing. This is about the fairness of the policy that we hold. It's a decision that was made in 2016. In 2016, the amount of social housing grant across Wales was just under £70 million. Now it's £310 million. That's what's that's the sort of change that has made a difference in terms of the amount of affordable housing that's been generated over the last couple of years, not the policy that we have. It's natural, it's quite incumbent. If somebody tells you that you can make a development without paying the £200,000, then you'd make the development without the £200,000. that's quite a simple mathematical thing to say and do. We received an application from an organisation against whom clearly we discriminate because they're not part of the RSL system the cabal that we operate here. That has now changed to being somebody who is contained within that policy. Now, if that policy is above and beyond anything that we can do as a council, because that is the policy of the council, and therefore we should naturally include that within any work, then that is something that we should be told in advance and should actually perhaps be in every single granted application, that if it comes forward from one of the 4 RSLs after we've agreed it, then anything we've agreed goes out the window, because that's effectively what we're being asked to do, is to set aside what we agreed in December, although I didn't particularly agree with the decision at the time, and we've been asked to set it aside again because one of the 4 organisations has come forward, says they won't do it because it's against our policy. Well, if our policy doesn't allow us to change our mind or do things differently, then it's not a very good policy. So my recommendation tonight, Chair, is that, and I appreciate I think it's been moved already, but that we stick to our guns, and that we require the Section 106 contribution, which is less than £200,000, which is frankly small beans in the wider context of everything that's done, in just the same way as we do from others, because that planning gain is, for the benefit of the community. Thank you, Chair.
Right, we have a motion anyway in front of us to accept officers' recommendations. Eddie Williams is the next hand up.
Yeah, I'm loath to do this. We had quite a lot of the discussion last time on the recommendations we're trying to agree what the and or and the either was, wasn't it? So, and it doesn't matter how many times I read this, I still think, right, are we ending up what part we're agreeing to? So just to clarify my understanding, when we say either, we're looking at, the recommendation, the first line, it says subject to the applicant entering into a Section 106 agreement. If that doesn't happen, does that mean this recommendation doesn't stand? That's probably my first question. And then when it says either, we've got the first bullet point, and that's where the residential units will be delivered, etc. But it's where this and or bit comes in. I would suggest that the first bullet under the and, if we're going to agree to this, that it's done by the Vale, Glamorgan and the Housing Association, that first bullet under the and makes sure that it is occupied by affordable housing, because otherwise we're ending up with an or bit, and I just think, it's too complex, this and or. So I would much prefer the simpler recommendation, if, as we were suggesting from the officers, there there's not an S106, it just should be that the recommendation is the first bullet under the either and the first bullet under the and that would be the end of it. We wouldn't have all this and or. So I just wondered whether that could be clarified before we go for a vote. Thank you.
I think Marcus, you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll deal with Councillor Williams's comments and actually Councillor Johnson's too, just to clarify matters. So Councillor Johnson referred to a cabal of housing associations. That is those are the 4 designated housing associations by Welsh Government who are designated to work with this council. There are different housing associations that designated across Wales to work with different councils. They are geographically based. In our case, Havard is one of those. Newydd is another one. I'm not going to reel them off. It's pointless doing so. They're not a cabal. They are a geographically designated group of housing associations who work with this council. So that's the first point of clarification. Secondly, I think Councillor Johnson was slightly confused. Nick Jones, I think, is possibly who he was referring to. Nick Jones is the council's operational manager for housing, and was actually speaking to represent the council's housing department in respect of the implications and effect of not following council procedure and policies would have on the delivery of affordable housing going forward. So just to clarify that for members, and to be fair to Councillor Johnson, Nick didn't actually make it clear, but he's not working for a charity. Nick actually represents the council in respect of the housing department.
Just quickly, sorry, Marcus, Chair, that isn't who I was referring to. They will know who I mean.
Right. Okay. Well. For clarification, I just thought it was important people understood who Nick was and where his comments came from. So in respect of the either or recommendation, it is a very difficult recommendation, and unfortunately, it's caused partly by the policy and partly by the shift in terms of who intends developing this. So we have to have the either and or, because if Havard are the housing association who are going to deliver this scheme. Could be Newydd, it could be one of the other designated housing schemes, and that is who's set out in that list. So you've got Havard, Newydd, United Welsh, or Wales and West Housing. Those are our geographically designated housing associations, or the Vale of Glamorgan Council itself. If those were to implement this planning approval, then there would be no requirement to make a Section 106 contribution, according to the policy set out by the council and by Cabinet in 2016, and which we've followed ever since that time, and which, to be fair to those housing associations, when they are looking to make purchases of properties or to make planning applications for properties, have assumed they would not have to make Section 106 requirements, and therefore have proceeded on that basis with those costs in mind. So that is why that comment is there. However, were they to, for example, purchase this property and then decide not to proceed with the development, the last thing we would want as a council is to have another developer come along and think, oh, I don't now have to make those contributions. Therefore, you have to have the or, so that if it is not one of our geographically designated housing associations who proceeds with the development and the benefits we will get from that in terms of our housing list, then they will be required to proceed on the basis of a Section 106 contribution. So that is why there is an either and an or. I hope that's explained it. Are you happy with that, Councillor Williams? Has that explained it properly?
I would be. I suppose really it's just that first line, subject, that should be underneath the first one. When it says either, you got the Vale Council, and then it should be subject to 106 monies for the rest of it, the and or. That would be my only suggestion, but that does clarify things. Thank you.
We can clarify, make sure that is clarified, and we can. But essentially, that is what that is stating.
Right. Thank you, Marcus. Eddie, I'm assuming that's a legacy hand, or did you want to come back? Right. Sandra Perks.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think I spoke last time about that. We don't need to accept this 106 money. What we do need is these social houses built. We need the accommodation. We've got 6,500 people on the waiting list in the Vale that we know about. I don't want our preferred or designated housing associations to suddenly grind to a halt and not be part of us wanting to get those 800 houses built over the next few years. And I just think if we have a policy where these designated housing associations don't have to pay the 106 money, then I'll go with that, because I want social housing built. I don't want to look my residents in the eye and say I've denied these houses being built because they haven't paid £200,000. How does that reflect in actually these people needing to be homed? I can't believe that councillors are wanting to vote against social housing, because that's effectively what people are doing. Sorry, that's all I've got to say on that.
Thank you, Sandra. Councillor Ernest, you have your hand up. You've been waiting patiently.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm interested in the viewpoint that Councillor Johnson has put forward at the last meeting and has repeated this time. And as I recall my recollection of the meeting a month or so ago, there was general consensus that we should be looking to have a contribution from the appropriate housing association. Now, I'm one of those people who believes that Section 106 monies are there to improve the infrastructure of the area. They're there to provide facilities, not only for the residents of the development, but they also help residents living in the surrounding areas. And obviously in this part of Barry, there is a need for infrastructure improvements. Now, the figure that is quoted, 180,000, give or take, plus 1% for art, is not a lot of money for a developer such as one of the housing associations. The rental income from the properties is substantial. There's no shortage of tenants, and members of the committee made that very clear tonight. So it's not as though the landlord's looking for tenants and rental income, far from it. It's the reverse of this, and Welsh Government, of course, are not making the Welsh rental situation any easier at the present time. So my view, Chairman, is that we ought to go and still seek 106 contribution. 180,000 is not a lot when you're building 25 units. That money will come back very, very quickly to the Housing Association. We will still have 25 units constructed on the site. I'm sure the developer is not going to walk away. The Vale Council will achieve its target of reducing the housing list, and everybody should be satisfied. So I'm supportive of the proposal to retain the 106 contribution for that reason. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ernest. Next on my list is Councillor Hodges.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened to various views on this. I have to start back at the original application. We do indeed have a policy that a housing association on our list is effectively exempt from 106. I understand that, but the actual original application was one that was not on our list, so had to sign up to a section 106, which is basically what we're now talking about. We seem to have a housing association game of pass the parcel here after the event. Now, I don't know about you, but whilst I want affordable housing in my town, I would be very loath to lose £200,000 of 106 money, which is there to not only improve life for the people who would be living in those flats, but also their neighbours. It's also to mitigate the fact that that's being built as a high density housing block in the centre of our town. I feel that to lose this money now means that quite effectively you could have any housing association not on our list coming in, getting planning permission, perhaps in an area we may not be quite so keen on, promising to pay a 106, which helps us feel a lot better about it, then passing the parcel to one of our 4 registered agreed members, and the 106 disappearing out the window. I feel conned here, Chairman, and I feel that we should have the money. Thank you.
I'm not entirely sure that's the way it worked. My understanding is that the original applicants that you referred to, when they went back and crunched the numbers, discovered that they actually couldn't do it and met the 106 contribution. However, no doubt
they should have crunched the numbers better then, Chairman.
They should, but no doubt Ian Robinson will clarify on that. Can I bring Ian Perry in before you, Ian Robinson, please? So and then you can reply to everybody rather than sort of back and forth. Councillor Robinson. Councillor Perry, sorry.
Just promoted you, Ian. Yeah, there is a potential here that we allow companies to circumnavigate the S106, and in the event that the 200,000, 180,000 pounds, whatever it is, makes this unfeasible for a certain housing association to develop, the property is still there. It is looking for a developer. And there's also the potential then perhaps for the Vale Glamorgan Council to step in and become the developer, because that's something that we apparently aspire to actually have more of our own properties. And then that will then show how feasible it is. So potentially stopping this, if Havard then say it's not now feasible, well then another developer perhaps steps up. I did look at the original application. I don't believe there's any parking. we are told that this is a development to home people who are currently in temporary accommodation. I don't know if they own homes. This is a step up for them. You hope then they would look for employment and to move perhaps on, or perhaps they stay where they are. We've not been told how long they will stay there. They could be there in 30 years' time, by which time they've got good income and two cars, and there's no parking spaces. And the alternative, of course, the green alternative to cars is bicycles, and there is a severe shortage of bicycle parking. I think, was it 1 per every 5 dwellings as a bicycle parking space? So there's very little bicycle parking spaces there. There's no room for a mobility scooter. There's no room for a trolley that can be towed behind the bicycle. Perhaps that's something that the S106 could contribute towards, but if you lose the S106, then you've got to start putting more public money into that. So there are a few issues with the actual application itself. A lot of good arguments have been said before me, so I'll just leave you to ponder on that as well.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Right, who have we got up now? I have Ian Robinson and then Marcus.
So, sorry, Chair, can I just ask for a clarification before Ian and Marcus speak?
You can ask for a clarification, yes.
Make more sense. Sorry, it's just that there's been a couple of references during today's debate, including from some speakers about homelessness, temporary accommodation, step up, etc. I'm just clarifying that the intention for this under this application is that it is ordinary social housing managed by a registered social landlord, and that the application process will be dealt with in the same way as other normal housing applications. I'm just contextualising everything, because obviously this is 25, and I think it was when I asked a question full council, was it last week? We've developed 76 units ourselves as a council in the last 5 years. So clearly we are highly dependent upon RSLs to deliver in the Vale.
Right, I'm sure that Ian Robinson will answer that as well. And who wants to go first, Ian or Marcus rather?
I'm happy to speak. Yeah, it's an application for affordable housing in the normal way. The context that Nick gave was what he sees as being the most likely route of occupants, but it's an affordable housing application in the normal way. I'll just go with Councillor Perry's comments first, just because they're most recent and in my mind. If the council were developing the scheme, the council would also, the 106 exemption would also apply. So there wouldn't suddenly be a section 106 required by the policy for the council. In terms of parking, we've been through this, but it's low car ownership tenure, and it's right in the town centre where it's sustainable. In terms of the contribution, just in respect to Councillor Johnson, Councillor Ernest and Councillor Hodges' comments, to be fair, this is not about whether it's only 180,000 and whether they should be able to pay it. 180,000 to section 106 is 180,000 less that can be put towards delivering affordable housing. No one is saying that open space isn't important, sustainable transport isn't important, community facilities aren't important. This is about the fact that people having somewhere to live is more important. At the end of the day, it's about people not having anywhere to live. And that's why a difficult decision, to be fair, was made to prioritise one above the other. And that's not to say the other doesn't matter. It's to say that this one is in such dire critical need. This is what's needed most. So it's not saying the other things don't count. So we just need to remember that it's not about whether the RSL can pay it. And I believe there are viability issues, but that's not the thing here. The thing is, if they pay it, that is 180,000 that cannot be put towards other affordable housing units, and 25 isn't going to touch the size of 469. There's more that are needed, and this money won't be able to go towards that if the 106 is paid, and that's the whole point of the policy. And not all members may necessarily agree with the policy, but that is the policy. That we have the LDP, we have the SPG that goes with it. And yes, there's scope to look at policies as we go forward to see whether there's merit in changing policy, and that's a conversation we can have. But as it stands, there's very good reason for this policy. And if the application were refused, because there's no point in going back to the applicant and saying, can you offer a bit less? If the application is refused, in my opinion, there is no planning basis, no planning merit for defending that. I can't see how I could conceive a reason for refusal that squared with our policy.
Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. One clear point of note as well to add to what Ian has said, all housing associations, including this one, are not-for-profit organisations. So we must make it clear that the 180,000, as Ian has done so there, the 180,000 or 200,000 will just be taken out of the money available for that housing association to build. They get social housing grant allocated via the council to them if they are geographically allocated housing associations through the Vale of Waltham Council to make these schemes work. That means that social housing grant will spread even thinner because we will be putting £200,000 of it to an alternative purpose. So, I can't stress enough that this is not a case of, as seemed to be indicated by Councillor Hodges, that it was a sneaky way of getting around the system. It's absolutely not. The applicant who originally made this application would have had no social housing grant allocated to it. It would have made its application knowing that. Therefore, it was even less viable. That being said, the housing association have it in this particular case, who will have some social housing grant allocated to it, still says that it's not able to proceed if it can't take the £200,000 out. And very reasonably, the reason for that is money it has no longer available to do another scheme elsewhere. So I think it's really important that we note that as councillors. This is not a profit, the developer's profit or any other profit that might be being siphoned out. This is actually money that will disappear that would normally have been spent on delivering more affordable housing.
Thank you, Marcus. Ian Perry, hopefully you'll be very quick. I mean, you have spoken on this already. Yeah. Is this a point of clarification?
Yeah, very quickly, yeah. Something Marcus just brought up, but the LDP is based on Planning Policy Wales 9, and we're now on Planning Policy Wales 11, and we seem to be focusing 100% on affordable housing without considering placemaking, which comes around. So it's not just that people need shelter over the head at night time. They do need the other infrastructure that goes with the housing, no matter what your social democratic being is at the present. So I think we need to be careful not to just have housing without the facilities that people need to live a good life with it. And I hear too often we're reverting back to Planning Policy Wales 9 and not listening to Planning Policy Wales 11. That's just what I want to say there.
Thank you for that. Right, moving on. Ian, can you put your hand down? Can we have a second, and then we have Councillor Williams. Councillor Williams, you made the motion. We need a seconder for that.
I'm happy to second. It's Councillor Perks.
Thank you. In that case, we obviously have a difference of opinion on here. We need to go through a vote. Either for or against officer's recommendation. For the officer's recommendation would be as it stands without the section 106. Against would be opposing that and presumably rejecting the application. The application is for the development to go ahead without the section 106. Understood. Any questions? Right, I'll go through the voting list, starting as is tradition with myself. I vote for. Councillor Perks.
Sorry, Chairman. What tradition is that?
It's the tradition that's been going on for the last. No, it isn't. Yes, it has. But I disagree with you. We're not discussing. We're not discussing this now. We're not. No, we're not whipping. Certainly not. Councillor, the tradition has been for the chair, then the vice chair, and then to go through it alphabetically. That's the way that Councillor Bird did it all the time, and that's the way I intend to carry on. Councillor Perks.
For.
Councillor Birch.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Bruce. Councillor Bruce. For. Thank you. Councillor Cave.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Champion.
Chair, I think Councillor Champion has dropped off. He did say at the beginning of the meeting that you might have some problems getting in and out of the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Councillor Drake.
For.
Councillor Ernest.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Gilligan isn't with us, I don't think. Councillor Hodges.
Against.
Councillor Johnson.
And I would have been against.
Councillor Payne.
For.
Councillor Perry.
I am going to vote against.
Thank you. Councillor Stallard.
For or Blythe.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Wilson.
For.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 10. 1, 2, 3. 10. I make that 10 to 4, 4. Okay, that's approved. Moving on. Heritage Coast Campsite Monknash. This, I think, Marcus, you're presenting on this.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm presenting on this application. Just call it up. Can I ask Ian, are you able to put the plans up?
Just a note, we have one speaker on this as well.
Right, okay. So if I, on that basis, I'll quickly just run through what the application is then and obviously move to the speakers. This is an application submitted in relation to an existing campsite known as Heritage Coast Campsite, based on a rural lane close to the Plough and Harrow Public House. It is a proposal for 2 new holiday lodges and the conversion of existing buildings used as a shop and bar, sort of bar serving the previous accommodation, and conversion of those to holiday lodge accommodation. So a total of 4 new accommodation units. Also, the change of use of part of the site to form a additional camper van and tent area, and a new toilet block and shower block. There are representations received against the report and the application. These are detailed in the report, 8 of those, and the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you. Right. In that case, we'll move on to the speaker, Andrew Parker. Are you there, Andrew?
Yes, Chairman.
All right, if you want to bring yourself up on screen and normal routine, you know the routine, 3 minutes, and Matt actually I think is the one that's going to interrupt you with a minute to go.
I'll try and get it within the 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members and officers. I'm Andrew Parker and I address you as the architect for the scheme before you. It relates to land at the Heritage Coast campsite, and the application is in respect of the provision of 2-number tourist units and the conversion of an existing campsite facility to form 2-number tourist accommodation units. Also, a proposed camper van and tented area with provision of a new toilet and shower block. The application has been called in for determination by Councillor Hanks for mainly 2 reasons: overpopulation in the rural Vale of holiday accommodation, and 2, the traffic grounds. This scheme would be too large and dangerous. There were another 18 listed reasons for bringing it to the committee, and I just ask you if you wanted to see them. They're on page 110. Dealing with the concerns regarding the overpopulation of tourist accommodation, it is clearly wrong, as the Vale of Glamorgan Tourist and Marketing stated, support for the development in principle, because, in summary, purpose-built accommodation of this nature is not widely available in the Vale. They also state that the nature of the proposed accommodation supports the Vale's aims to become an all-year destination, which is a particular strength of the tourism industry in the Vale and sets us apart from others and more notable destination in Wales. I would say they're 4 fairly humble units, 2 bedrooms thing. Dealing with the highway concerns raised, this has been addressed, and the scheme before you has been subject to the Highway Department, who replied as follows. Following revisions to the proposal, they state that no objections subject to the access being completed in bound materials for the first 6 metres. Therefore, having met all the requirements, I would ask you to support the officer's recommendation and approve the application which is before you.
Thank you, Andrew. If you just hang on a sec, see if there's any points of clarification from members of the committee. Again, I see no hands. Anybody? Nope. In that case, thank you, Andrew, and you can go dark and carry on.
Good night all. I'll say goodbye.
Good night, Andrew. Right, back to you, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've really got nothing more to add. Obviously, the key issue here is there is an existing campsite there. You will, if you've gone through the report, note that there have been some ongoing discussions as the application has proceeded, particularly around the creation of a new access and also about removing, initially it was looking to put touring caravans on the site, and that has come off the recommendation now following the comments of the Highways Officer. So on the balance, we have looked at this scheme. It's taken some time to get to us now, but we feel it is a useful addition to the tourism offer for the Vale, and we don't believe there will be any further additional, if you like, impact on neighbours, and we think it will be an improvement to the offer generally throughout the Vale. So yes, we're recommending approval.
Thank you very much. Any members of the committee have any comments, any questions? Councillor Ernest.
Yes, Chairman. It's been the policy of the council for a good number of years now, in going back to when I was on the council previously, to promote tourism in the Vale. It's brought many millions of pounds of investment into the Vale, and it's brought many millions of pounds of visitors' money into the Vale as well. And this is a good site, as indeed are most of the other sites in the Vale. And I think we have, I won't say a duty, but we should be promoting these on behalf of the council. We advertise extensively to bring visitors into the Vale. They need somewhere to stay when they get here. Tastes are changing. Not everybody wants to stay in a hotel or a B&B or whatever these days. They like to camp in the outdoors and enjoy the natural environment. And I think this site, along with others in the Vale, serve this purpose. So I'm wholly in favour of the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Anthony. Councillor Payne, Helen Payne.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's fantastic development with the upsurge post-pandemic and the rise in camping, caravanning, and camper vans. I don't know if anybody's tried to buy one lately, but they're really, really expensive. So I would welcome this development, and it's a cheap family option as well for holidaying in the Vale of Glamorgan. We haven't got an abundance of tourist places to go in the countryside, so I think it's a fantastic development.
Thank you, Helen. And Councillor Kay, if you have your hand up.
Yes, I do indeed. Thank you, Chair. Although I do concur with the previous two members, I would like just to point out that it is often the case that the rural Vale is decreasing, and that any planning permission that we grant in the rural Vale should be actually given really great consideration. I do think it's a shame that Sally Hanks didn't come along this evening and speak to us as a committee about the concerns that she obviously had about this application, because I think we should actually give a lot of credit to what a ward member says. And if she's saying that she thinks this is in some way not appropriate in her ward, it would have been lovely to have had her come along and explain that in more detail to us. I do agree that we do need greater variability of tourism in the Vale, but I am very concerned that once somebody applies for planning permission in the rural Vale, that what often happens is they come along again and again and again and just increase and increase and increase. And you know, at some stage we have to say as a committee, let's keep rural before we end up with no rural Vale at all. So reluctantly I will support officer's recommendations this evening, but I would just like to suggest to committee that we are very careful indeed when we pass planning permission in the rural Vale.
Thank you, Councillor Kay. Councillor Williams, you have your hand up now.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to address the fact that you quite rightly to point out, Councillor Cave, that Councillor Hanks called it in, and the reasons are on the report. Basically, there was a concern with the amount of traffic and the access to the site. The site is established, and it just, as you quite rightly pointed out, you don't want to sort of extend it beyond what it's capable of. And I think with the officer's negotiations with the applicant has minimised all the additional sites. So what we've ended up with is these fixed lodges, and therefore the concerns that were raised are less of an objection now. So having said all that, and I get a sense that we're all in agreement with it's a good site to go for, I'll move officers' recommendations.
Thank you, Eddie. Do I have a seconder for that?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Thank you, Karis. Councillor Stellard. Marcus, you want to come back?
Very quickly, I don't want to prolong it, but obviously Councillor Cave quite rightly raised an issue there around looking at applications properly, and also taking time to make sure that things aren't being forced through just because they previously got permission. And I think in this particular case, it's really important to note that there has been significant negotiation. On top of that, it's also very close to a site as an ancient monument site. CADU have been consulted, and there has been some ongoing discussion around what's necessary to make sure that that site isn't affected by this scheme. So your officers, just to give you assurance that your officers do take it very seriously, and balance, if you like, as we always have to, balance those competing issues, and ensure that what we get at the end obviously is the improvement in tourism facilities, but not at the expense of the loss of character for the rural vale. And I think in this particular case that's happened.
Thank you, Marcus. Right, unless I see anybody indicating to the contrary, I don't see any of the hands up. Then I will take that as support for officers' recommendations. All the speakers supported and nobody has voted against. In that case, that is carried. Moving on then to the Brook Lane St Nicholas one, page 125. I think, Steve, you're presenting on this, aren't you?
That's correct. Thank you, Chairman. Okay, I hope you can all see my screen. So let's call the report.
Can you make it bigger?
Yeah, it's the next slide is much bigger as well. So hope you can see that. So the site itself is a site called Brooklands in Brook Lane, which is about 500 metres to the south of St Nicholas in the countryside. So it's a complex of is a main house, and there's a complex of barn conversions and other sort of formal rural buildings at the site. It's a bit of a complicated history on this one, so I'll try and just go through the basics of the proposal and then go into a bit more of the history. So planning permission is sought partly in retrospect for a barn conversion to two of the barns that are on the eastern part of the site. So originally, there's planning history for the conversion of this barn, which is called Barn E, which is the brick barn for its conversion. And then there's a portal frame building, which is called Barn F, and that was approved for the parking of vehicles in relation to the use of that barn. But the approval of that barn was on the basis that there were no external changes, so simply utilising the barn as it stood. Comes a bit of history. So this is the pre-existing situation where you've got the brick, smaller brick building, and you've got the larger portal frame building to the rear of it. In plan form, that's a brick building, and you've got the partially open fronted portal building. So this is the proposal that we've got in front of us now. As I say, it's partly works have been significantly progressed on site. So the brick building has now been converted with a new brick outer skin added. As part of that, alterations have been made to existing window and door openings. As part of the works before you, this flat roof link has been constructed, although it's worth noting that it's actually been constructed in brick and not as shown here. And then the large portal frame building to the rear has, as shown in the photos below, we feel that's been significantly rebuilt with a new roof, new elevations, and new openings. So just to have a look at the photos, which I think are running down. So this is the slightly better build. So just zoom in a bit. Sorry. Okay, so this is looking at the gable end of the brick building. This is called Barney, and that's been converted and largely completed. As the report says, this does vary from the previous approval, but whilst there are some variations to what we've approved, on balance, the changes actually are considered acceptable. So our concern doesn't lie with the conversion and the approach to convert Barney. So as you can see, you've got Barney, and then you've got the portal frame building, which the photos below it show in better detail. But as you can see, this building has been effectively rebuilt externally. So there's concrete block work. So that effectively will be in a skin. The proposal is to finish it with some sort of black profile steel sheeting, and that's the gable end. It's worth noting that historically there would have been a low-level concrete block wall with profile steel sheeting above. Also, I'd ask members to note that the roof has changed with the new roof. It might be the same eaves and ridge heights and general profile, but the eaves and the verge have been sort of extended out, resulting in a more domesticated look than a simple agricultural portal frame building. So this is the inside of the brick barn E, as you can see the extent of those changes. This is the inside of barn F. As members will note, everything inside the barn is pretty new. So all external block work, new roof, new steel framework. And this is the separation between the brick built barn, which has been re-bricked externally, and then the portal frame buildings. Members can see this portal frame building, 2 of the bays were originally open and the 3rd bay was partially open. The agent has submitted photos showing that historically these bays were closed as well, but certainly from recent memory, these 2 bays have been open, and that's another view of the open barn. So just in terms of the planning history, because I think it is relevant, this is the approved scheme which proposed the conversion of the brick barn, and then as you can see, the use of this portal frame building here just for parking with no external changes whatsoever. The agent has submitted this photo. As from the photos above, things have still continuing to be built at site. So the external modern blockwork elevations have now been clad with what appears to be a vertical profile steel sheeting. I'm not sure what's happening on the other elevations. We've only received this just whilst finalising the report, so the officer has not had a chance to have a look at that. But in terms of the policy, MD11 looks at conversion of rural buildings, and the whole point of the policy really is to allow the conversion of buildings, but where these buildings are converted, they are converted with minimal alterations and adaptations and no significant extensions. So as you can see with the photos in front of you, we feel, particularly with respect to that portal frame building, that it's been significantly altered to a point where it really appears as a new building. It's got a new roof, it's got new elevations, window openings exist where ones weren't before, and equally where it was open before, it's now been blocked up. So it bears very, very little resemblance to the former building that stood. In terms of the history, obviously the applicants are fully aware of our concerns in respect of the conversion of the larger building. We've had 2 applications in 2017 and 2019 which have been refused, albeit they were for different schemes which caused more harm, but obviously it's regrettable that the applicant decided to go ahead and convert that barn without any planning permission, and clearly would have possibly understood that it did require permission, given that he'd actually applied for permission to convert them in previous applications. So the recommendation, because of the scale of the alteration of the portal frame building, is that we are recommending refusal, and because the work's taken place, we are recommending, it's a dual recommendation to serve an enforcement notice to really remove the unauthorised additions to the barn, really effectively removing the doors and windows, blockwork walls, the cladding and the roof material. In addition, we're also very concerned about the brick link that links the red brick building to the portal frame barn. Again, that's just an unjustified extension. We can allow extensions to barns, or particularly links, but they've got to be very, very lightweight, principally fully glazed structures. In this case, a brick link, particularly with the impact that has in bringing the whole of the two buildings together, is considered significantly harmful. And then the third sort of resolution, really, in terms of the enforcement action, is to make good the gable end of barn B, which has been opened up to provide the link through. So the recommendation is to refuse the planning permission and to seek authorisation to take the necessary enforcement action. Thank you.
I should have mentioned before we got into this that we do have a speaker on this. So, Councillor Perry, if you could put your hand down for the time being. I think Mr. John Geraint, John, you want to speak on this? Are you there?
I am, Chair. Thank you very much.
Yeah, right. You know the routine. 3 minutes to speak, and Matt will give you a warning at 1 minute to go when you're ready.
Thank you. Apologies first, I've lost my voice partially, so bear with me. Good afternoon, members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. As set out in the detailed report before you, there is considerable detail and context to this proposal, albeit a clear and sole issue, i.e. whether the proposal complies with LDP policy MD11. Your officer's position and recommended reason for refusal is that the proposal completely removes the character of the previous simple rural structure and has an unacceptable impact on the appearance and rural character of the building and its setting. I'd respectfully suggest that the images set out on page 151 of your report, which the officer did display, evidences and confirms the opposite. By way of context, and before addressing this sole issue, it's important to note that it is accepted by officers that in previously allowing residential parking in this building, it is an incidental residential building. This confirms that the issue in this case is not one of use, but rather design. There are no objections to the proposals from any statutory consultee or third party. These proposals are not the resubmission of earlier planning applications. They are proposals in their own right that are considerably different to the previous schemes. I'd ask you to refer to pages 145 and 147 for images of the previous two-storey schemes proposed, which this scheme differs markedly to. The differences in this scheme are recognised by officers such that they eliminate a number of previous concerns and reasons for refusal, which are no longer issues. Officers accept that the proposals will be viewed in the context of other buildings, are within an established yard, and do not have significant wider landscape impact. Officers also accept that there will be no parking or biodiversity impacts, and that a landscaping scheme will enhance the setting of the building and the complex within which it sits. Given all of this, the issue is whether officers' assessment that the works give the building an urban and domesticated character and appearance, which is far removed from what was originally a simple rural barn, is reasonable and correct. It's important to note that the policy does not rule out substantial reconstruction, extension or alteration, just works that unacceptably affect the appearance and rural character of the building and its setting. It's the applicant's position, which because by virtue of the building being of the same size, position and form, that it's not markedly different in character and appearance, the character has not been wholly lost, and the resultant building does not overtly have the appearance of a domestic dwelling. Given this, and given that the officers recognise it's not the use that's in question, we respectfully request that the proposals are approved and enforcement action not sanctioned in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. John. If you just stay on a sec while I see if there's any points of clarification that any members of the committee might want to raise. Councillor Perry, you have your hand up.
Yeah, there's obviously been a bit of history here. How does the sort of latest proposal differ to the proposal that was put forward before that was refused?
Thank you. Yes, I think, well, to be fair to officers and their very useful report, I think some of the images in the report clearly demonstrate this. So if members had reference to the images on page 145, for example, within the report, I think Steve is kindly going to display that, so thank you very much for that. So the bottom image on this page here, 145, shows the elevation. It might need to scroll down a little touch there, Steve, if I may. Thank you very much. So that southeast elevation there, you'll see it's of a substantial structure, which is 2-storey in height with a significant change in levels at the lower level. So that was the first scheme. And then if you flick just over leaf at the top of the page, that shows a 2-storey form then to that first proposal. Moving on then to page 147. Again, the elevations on this page here continue to show, particularly say that second set of images there, continue to show a 2-storey element to this extension element that we are now concerned with. It's the one that's running horizontally across the report, not facing towards you. The one facing towards you is the barn E that officers have said they have no issue with. And then finally then contrast that then with what is shown on page 151, for example, which is a photograph, albeit there are earlier drawings within the report, which effectively show the building now as constructed relative to the building that occupied the site previous. Okay, so that hopefully explains the difference between what was previously proposed and now.
Any other points of clarification? Right. Steve, do you want to come back? Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. John. I mean, if you can, if there are no other points of clarification, you can now go dark and mute. And Steve, you need to come back. Ian, you've still got your hand up.
So his hand's up now as well. Yeah. So just looking at the only change. What is the substantial change to the corrugated black building now from what it was before?
I think
Did he cover that?
Mr. John has covered that, and I think we need to move on.
Okay.
Steve, do you want to come back, please?
Well, just to pick up a point. I mean, obviously, we do agree with some of the points that Mr. John has made. We're not. Yes, this was an ancillary building, but equally an ancillary building. Perhaps in that decision, in hindsight, we should have probably had the barn just demolished. The barn was really just kept informally, just to park cars in, which is obviously very, very different to then making what we think are quite substantial alterations to utilise it as part of a much larger extended dwelling at the site. And another thing to point out is obviously Mr. John has provided us usefully with the photo of the gable end of the property, comparing the pre-existing image and this image, and then the converted image. But what we're not seeing is, and we've got photos above, the bank of additional windows that have been installed on that rear elevation. Again, that's quite a significant alteration and is totally changing the whole aspect and the design of the original buildings. It's quite simply going back to the basics of policy MD11. And if you think about your traditional stone barns, it's about reusing windows and doors and making absolutely minimal alterations to make these buildings habitable. It was developed really as an exception policy to allow buildings of architectural and historic merit in the rural Vale to be retained, and to allow residential use as an exception to general residential use in the policy. So it's with that's as I said, we've taken a flexible approach on Barney, which is the brick building, but I'm afraid with Barn F, whilst ultimately you might look at that screen and say, well, it looks the same in terms of massing and scale, and we're not saying it's of particularly different dimensions, but it has been totally rebuilt. you know, there's a significant full width opening in that gable end. You've got the additional doors and doors and windows in the rear elevation, and conversely to that, blocking up of what was the open elevation on the inside, which then links to the flat roof extension. So you know, it's how we've seen photos from the inside. The whole building has been rebuilt, and it is materially different to what was a. I just like to show you the sort of pre-existing situation where we granted consent simply when this building was cleared out to park 2 cars in it. You know, it's materially different what we've got now in front of you to consider to what was approved with the conversion of Barney and then a gap and then just effectively an area of garaging. So you know, we do think it's not just a conversion of that building and the alteration of that building, it's the connection with the flat roof extension, and it's the creation of a whole of one much bigger dwelling, and then even to the point where what's happening at the back of it and the potential encroachment of curtilage, etc. You know, what we've got in front of us is markedly different. You know, we accept that when you look at the planning history, certainly from the first refused scheme, you know, it is markedly different. It's no longer 2-storey, but actually I think it's relatively comparable, albeit there's no longer a gable end and there doesn't seem to be a drop in levels, but it's still there or thereabouts in providing a flat roof link and converting that large portal frame building. It may not be 2 stories, but it's still nevertheless pretty much what we refused. Certainly when you view it from outside the site, and there's a footpath to the east of the site, you know, the level of impact and the reason we refused that application back in 2019 is pretty much the same as you know, the same as the reasons presented to you now. And obviously our concern is the fact that these works have now progressed, particularly as the applicant would have been fully aware of our concerns in relation to previous schemes and what does and doesn't need planning permission. So I'm happy to leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Marcus, can I bring Councillor Perry in to make his point, and then you perhaps can come back on that?
Yeah, Stephen, I have been on site, and the reason I went on site is there is no footpath to the east of the site, so I couldn't actually see it. Now, there's a map that shows a footpath, but that footpath doesn't exist. So you can't actually see this building from any public highway, whether it's a footpath or a road.
Well, I've got a photo from the officer, and the officer advised me that it was from a public area, and you can see the rooftops. I
mean, in the distance, you can see the new school in Barry. So I suppose if you stood on the roof there with a zoom camera, you could then see the barn. But it's a very obscure location. So I actually couldn't get on the roof of the school with a zoom camera or telescope.
This is a photo. Yeah, sorry. This is the photo that the officer has sent me, which except I'm sharing it, so it's probably difficult to see. And okay, I accept it's a distant view, but nevertheless, you can see the group of farm buildings at the site.
Yeah, thank you. Right, Marcus, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a very quick point on this. This actually comes back to a point that Councillor Cave rightly made on the last application regarding the rural vale in general. But this is a situation where you do have this issue of creeping suburbanisation. This application was originally granted some years ago. The applicants tried various schemes to try and get approval for it, failed to get approval, but in any event has decided to push ahead and proceed with a development. This application, the history of this site goes back many years and actually has a very similar history of unauthorised development and then proceeding to try and get permission to go forward. In this particular case, I think Steve has made the point eloquently that the building itself is essentially a complete takedown and rebuild of an open portal fronted shed, but replacing that with what is essentially an enclosed extension to a barn, which while we do sometimes allows very small extensions, they usually have to be in the context of the building itself. This has new glass openings, window openings all over it, and whether or not it's highly visible from the surrounding countryside is irrelevant. It is the creeping suburbanisation of the rural Vale. So I just wanted to make that point. We obviously had that conversation regarding the campsite in Monknash. There's a very similar issue here. Your officers are doing their best in this particular instance to ensure that we don't have these situations where developments proceed on a piecemeal basis and creep forward, and end up ultimately altering the character of the rural Vales quite significantly.
Thank you, Marcus. Any other debate?
Sorry, if I could just come back, I've just
Sure.
looked at the ordinance. So I think that photo was taken from Dufferin Lane, so apologies. It was taken from a public highway, so we still maintain, notwithstanding what Marcus has said, clearly that's the case, but it is, the site is also visible from a public viewpoint.
Ian Perry, is this new information, or is this
Well,
a new question?
100% wasn't taken from Dufferin Lane. That's 100% certain it wasn't taken from Dufferin Lane. I'm just looking at the options potentially, if there is enforcement, what the owner could do. So it's been mentioned that they could potentially demolish the barn, but I believe they could also remove the blockwork, because that has happened to allow parking in it. They could block it all back up.
Councillor Perry, that's not relevant to the application. We are here to discuss the application we have before us, not what we think they should be doing apart from that. That's for their
consequences of our decisions.
Well, I'm happy to come back on, Chairman. Sorry, I'm happy to come back on that. I mean, it's a relevant point. So yeah, if I just go down to the enforcement recommendations and what are required to do. So as I said, it's all in relation to Barn F and not Barn E, and it's the removal of the doors and windows and blockwork walls and cladding. So prior to that photo submitted by the agent, we had no idea of what the cladding would look like. And one could argue that cladding that has been now put up could be potentially pretty much reflect the building as it stood before. So if we, for example, had an application in to remove everything and put that cladding back up and retain it on the three sides and retain it as an open frame portal building, in terms of materiality, that elevations would be acceptable. But our concern here is we've got a slate roof on it, which is slightly unusual with the profile sheeting elevations, and together with that, it's the doors and the openings. They're the things that have broken out and broken into that portal frame building. I mean, the building itself is not of any merit, unlike perhaps more historic rural buildings, which are stone buildings or brick buildings. The building doesn't have any particular merit, and there'd be no concern from our point of view if that building were to be lost. But nevertheless, it was just granted consent to simply reuse it in its existing form. There's some degree of flexibility in the enforcement action, subject to members agreeing with those resolutions. Officers could potentially go on site and consider the acceptability of the cladding, but that would just be the cladding. The key thing for us is to have those window and door openings removed and the original openings on the inner courtyard to be reinstated.
And the link to be removed.
Yeah, and the link to be removed. Yes. That's
I did look at the roof, and from my recollection, it wasn't a slate roof on that barn. It was like a corrugated iron kind of roof. That's what I saw.
Yeah, I looked with the officer because I wasn't sure myself, and I haven't got a photo here, but we have a very, very clear photo that does show on the larger portal frame building that is a slate roof, and it's a slate roof with interlocking plain concrete tiles. That's very, very clear to see from a photo we have.
Okay, just looking back on the photo here. So I'm just looking now, trying to find it's so many pages on this. Is it 70 pages or something? It's not sure, but I didn't notice a slate roof, so it was my recollection. It was actually corrugated still.
We were unsure when we looked at this, but we've worked out that what we're seeing there, those ridges are actually the ridge tiles, the interlocking section of each ridge tile, and the roof itself is slate.
Okay,
but we're not sure.
No, we are sure.
They are sure.
Yeah,
they are sure.
Okay.
Yes, Stephen just said that they are sure. In that case, Councillor Williams, you have your hand up. Councillor Perry, could you put your hand down?
Yeah, in the event we've had considerable discussion about it, yeah, it looks barn shaped to me, but it's just a change of use and everything else, an extension on what they put up, and a history of retrospective application. It's somebody that should know better. So I'd move officer's recommendation.
And I'd like to second, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Cave. And Councillor Williams. In that case, I'm not sure whether we've got consensus here or whether we have anyone opposed. If you'd like to indicate if you are opposed, Ian Perry, you're opposed. In that case, we will go to the vote, as is normal. We're either for officers' recommendations or against officers' recommendations, being including the enforcement. So I'm voting for. Councillor Perks.
For.
Councillor Birch.
For.
Councillor Bruce.
For.
Councillor Cave.
For.
Councillor Champion.
I think he's left us, Chair.
Oh, he's left us. Yes, sorry. I'll let me cross him through. Councillor Coop isn't with us. Councillor Drake.
For.
Councillor Ernest.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hodges.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For. Obliged.
Councillor Payne.
For.
Councillor Perry.
Against.
Councillor Stallard.
Obliged. For.
Councillor Williams.
For.
And Councillor Wilson.
For.
In that case, with only one against and everyone else for, that officer's recommendations are carried. Thank you. Moving on. Again, it's Steve. I propose to take these three on different close one by one, but I'm hoping that any debate or discussion will take place on the first one, and we'll take the rest then with little discussion because time's moving on. Although, of course, if people want to talk about it, they can. Steve, it's yours to present.
Yep.
And we have no speakers now from now on, I don't think.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application site relates to some semi-detached dwelling at 2 Duffering Close and with site edge red in southern part of St Nicholas. It's a 2-storey semi-detached house. So the site falls within the settlement boundary of St Nicholas and also within the conservation area. The property as well was identified in the conservation area appraisal and management plan as a positive building, as is all of the other dwellings in Duffering Close, and also defined as county treasures. So again, this is another retrospective application. So the application is being made. It's a Vale of Glamorgan application from our housing colleagues. It's a Regulation 3 application to retain the roof tiles that have been replaced on the property. So the replacement roof tiles, if I just run down a little bit, are what are called Ashmore roof tiles. They're a double form plain interlocking smooth roof tile, and in the colour brown. I think probably the photo is probably the best representation of the works that have been taken to date. So see, this application site is number 2, which is subject to application, and the adjoining property number 1 still retain their original roof tiles. So just further to the discussions we previously had on Port Road, as Councillor Johnson I think has referenced, the fact that our housing team made reference to the fact that they needed to re-roof these buildings with supply chain issues and COVID, etc. Whilst that is a statement made by our housing team, that has little material weight in the way we've considered the application. We are merely considering it based on the acceptability of that replacement roof tile. So as members can hopefully see, we officers do accept there is a difference between these 2 roof tiles, but when viewed from the street, they're slightly different format. But in terms of the colour and the lap, they are very, very close. Again, they're a plain tile. I realise that the existing tiles are like a granular textured tile, and these are a plain tile. But you know, I think that photo is very, very useful, and it shows that in terms of its tonality and the profile, and like the discussion we had in Port Road, where we were going from a profile concrete tile to a slate, with a change in the profile and smoothness, etc. This is, you know, this is much more of a subtle, very, very subtle change. And I think also to some degree, the gable and the chimney help break the two parts up as well. And it's actually, if you're driving past, quite difficult to ascertain. You can see a difference, but you don't really know what was the original or what wasn't the original. So you understand we had quite significant comments from St Nicholas and Bomsall Community Council raising concern about the fact that these changes have taken place. So in terms of, there's a bit of history on these. So we've got the 3 applications in at the moment, but we did deal a year or so ago with an application at number 11, which we ended up approving on the basis that whilst we noted a change, the actual tile used for number 11 back in 2020 was considered acceptable, and the conservation officer at the time was happy with that change. And whilst, you know, we do accept the loss of the original tile is regrettable, we are still working. These are council houses, and you know, they are going through a package of upgrading the sort of fabric of these buildings, and those tiles have obviously reached their natural life and needed to be replaced. Yes, they could have been replaced by near identical tiles, but nevertheless, the tile that has been used, which is a Marley Ashmore, and the brown colour and the way that it's been applied, and the headlap, etc., and the spacing, is not considered harmful both to the character of the property, the adjoining semi-detached, and then the wider character of the close, the county treasure, and we consider it to preserve the character of the conservation area. So say the report is relatively brief, but it's quite simply, when you look and compare the original and the new tiles, the difference between them is limited. I'm happy to answer any questions on that. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Stephen. As it's your ward, Ian Perry, I'll call you in first.
Yeah, point of information. When I noticed the change of roofing, I reported the change of roof tiles on number 4, number 10, number 12, and number 13. I didn't mention number 2. We've also just seen a photograph comparing number 1 with number 2. Number 2, Duffing Close, does not have Ashmore tiles on the roof. It's got the original tiles. The new tiles, they are the identical same tiles on number 2 as on number 1 and on number 3. And in fact, number 2 and number 3 are joined up. There's a first floor at number 2, and it links directly into number 3, and you can see they're the exact same tiles. Another property on Duffing Close was retiled this year, and having seen the community council's response, they went and put identical tiles on to number all the original tiles. Next door neighbours, it all matches. The problem we've got is that the Vale of Glamorgan have put the Ashmore tiles on 4 of their properties, and one resident who was housebound and never actually got to see the tiles she put on the roof because she never left the property during that time, but had been told her next door neighbour's house had new roof on and was significantly different. So then she put new tiles on her roof to copy the tiles of her neighbour, the ones she never saw because she never left her house. It was reported in 2019. It took 12 months for the Vale of Glamorgan to put a retrospective plan application in, but it only took about a month for the disabled vulnerable lady to receive enforcement and submit a planning application, which left us in a terrible position because that was a vulnerable person. So we had our hands tied, and we weren't really able to react and say no, because of the desperate personal situation there. So that was really condemned by the community council. So we are sort of being misled here, because we've been told to look at the roof tiles on number 2 and how similar they are. Perhaps we can share the screen and open the photograph on the community council response, which shows they look completely different. And then the planning committee can make a proper determination as to whether the Ashmore, which is a single lap, relatively cheap tile, is a suitable replacement for the double lap tile that was there before. But I think the planning committee do need to see a comparison of the tiles that were there before and that are there now, and that image is available from the community council. It's on our thing, but I don't think the planning committee can make a determination without actually seeing what's there.
I've just gone down the report. I'm happy to share the photo of Ford Duffering Close, which has clearly got the new tiles on, and the adjoining property, although there is a bit of a tree in the way, but it does give an impression of let me zoom in as much as I can on that.
There's a clear photograph which is not obstructed in any way on the community council's response, and that is what the planning committee need to see, because it's like they're alongside one another, and you can see they don't match in shape or colour. They don't match at all. And then you can actually walk down and see number 2 matches with number 1 and it matches with number 3 because it's a different tile, it's the correct tile. You can see the new roof on number 16 and it matches number 15 and number 3 and number 2. Yeah, it's just you're misleading the committee here. We need to see that photograph, and we've got the technology. Let's just see that photograph from the community council.
Well, I've got a photograph of 13 and 14, and you can see I mean, this definitely is the new tile on 13, and you can see. Let me just share that, and that's in my opinion that is a clear photo. If members can see that.
No, I'm sorry, I can't accept that as being a clear photograph.
Well, I mean, it's a clear. I
mean, that's a matter of opinion rather.
It's not a matter of opinion. You can't see that, and if you just open up, because we've got the technology, open up and show the photograph that's on the community council response. I think that's quite easy to do.
Okay, I'll call that up, and if you just give me.
In the meantime, Councillor Wilson, we'll hear from you while Stephen's trying to sort that out.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I mean, I don't want to spend hours of valuable officers' time talking about roof tiles, to be quite honest with you. I mean, they are lovely properties, these are. And I think the roof tiles I've seen pictures of, I think enhance actually the properties, what I've seen. They don't detract from it, they enhance it. So I like to move officers' recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Payne.
Thank you. I was just going to make the point about they're actually new tiles and the other tiles are weathered. So in time, will they become more matched? Obviously, because the newer tiles are going to weather. That's just my point. And I will second officer's recommendation.
Thank you for that. Stephen, have you got the...
Sorry, I'm still trying to get into our back office system. I can see Ian's in it. Ian, have you managed to get into it?
No, Chair, just to add, in relation to the previous comments made around the tiles weathering, it's an important point that in years gone by, we used to have a standard condition, where we'd ask for bird guano to be spread on roofs when they've been replaced to ensure a accelerated weathering of the tile. That is due to a number of cases of peels and other issues has been deemed to be inappropriate. But in answer to the question, absolutely, tiles will obviously look very new and have a very different appearance from tiles which have been up for 10, 15, 20 years. I actually have the Google Earth photo up of the properties concerned, if members want me to share that with them. That does show the old tiles. They were obviously very weathered and covered in moss and detritus. I have to say, in comparison to, yes, the tiles that have been shown in the photo you've got in front of you of 14 and 13 and 14 different close, and obviously at 2 and the other properties, they do look different. They're new tiles. Actually, in terms of profile, they're very, very similar. And I think, I do take quite offence that it's been suggested by a councillor that as officers, we're trying to mislead the council. This is nothing. Your officers are presenting you with a situation that's arisen. The roof tiles have been replaced. The applicant has submitted an application retrospectively. The applicant happens to be the housing department, but nevertheless, officers are trying to go through the situation with you and explain why the new tiles will not look significantly different and not different enough to recommend refusal of them. And that is the fact of the case in this particular instance.
Thank you, Marcus. Councillor Perry, I'm loath to come back.
Yeah, in
I'm
terms of weather,
loath to come back to you. You need to moderate your language and consider the training that you've had under standards.
Yeah,
because and your behaviour towards officers.
I'm just pointing out that the tiles on number 2 are an excellent match with the tiles at number 3 and number 1. I think I should compliment them because at number 2 they've done an excellent job. It's the other 4 that are the issue.
Moving on. Do we have these photographs available now?
No, I think Steve's just messaged to say that he's lost power in his house. We can't get the screens. We've actually lost Steve as well.
We lost Steve as well. In that case, Marcus, if you could, or Ian, if you could steer this then now.
Yeah, I will just quickly. I will share with the council. Hopefully, councillors can see that is a Google image. Obviously, I can't access the system. That's from September 2009. You'll see at the bottom of the screen. Those are what the roofs looked like at that point. Obviously, that's over 12 years ago. But you will see, obviously, they were severely weathered then, and clearly would have looked different to what the new tiles in terms of their colour and perhaps the moss coverage. But actually, in terms of profile, they look like now they look like a newly roofed property, but the actual tiles themselves are very, very similar. So I hope members can see, and I shall move along just so that you can see. Unfortunately, none of these properties have been re-roofed in 2009, so there's no comparison. That just shows you what was the roofs were like at that time. But I think that's important to note.
I think that we have spent enough time on this. I propose to move on. We have a motion supporting, seconded motion supporting officer's recommendation, and I propose. I understand that Councillor Perry will be voting against, and we have people voting for, so we will go to the vote on this. And starting with myself, I am supporting officers' recommendations. Sandra Perks.
Supporting officers' recommendation.
Rhiannon Birch.
Officers' recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Bruce.
4.
Gillian. Yeah. 4. Councillor Cave.
4.
Councillor Drake.
4.
Councillor Ernest.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hodges.
I'd like to see the photos. Abstain.
Okay. Councillor Johnson.
I'll abstain.
You're abstaining as well. Councillor Payne.
4.
Councillor Perry.
Well, I'm still vote against, but I'm just a bit of a clarification. Are you voting in favour of the Ashmore being on number 2, which aren't on there retrospectively?
You're voting against officers' recommendations.
Absolutely.
Councillor Stallard.
Applied. 4.
Councillor Williams.
4.
And Councillor Wilson.
4.
Right, that I make that 8 for, 1 against, and 2 abstentions. So that's clearly carried. Moving on to onto the next one, which is number 4, Duffering Close. And Steve, you're back.
Yeah, sorry, my battery went, so I do apologise for that. So let me just sorry, I've had to restart everything. Apologise for this. Again, in terms of the issues, it's the same issue again in terms of replacement of the roof tiles. See, number 4 is more within the close, so it's more of a group value issue than the one we've just discussed. But as Marcus has what you're sharing. We can see them. We can see the new tile on the right-hand side, and then obviously the existing original tile on the adjoining property. And there is a difference in colour, but as has been discussed and as has set out in the report, even if it were to replace with exactly the same tile, it wouldn't be the same colour anyway. And these tiles have obviously weathered quite significantly over the last 70 years with moss and everything else. So, in time, we feel that they really will be bedded in and not cause the harm that is being alleged certainly by Councillor Perry. And again, it's a very, very close match, and is not a stark contrast in terms of the wider street, and is considered to preserve the character, the conservation area, and also the property as a county treasure. So again, the recommendation then is recommendation one is to approve the retention of these roof tiles.
Right, thank you, Ian. Steve, any comments, any questions? In that case, Eddie.
Move officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Anyone second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Sandra.
Officer's recommendation.
Ian Perry, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, it's just to say that I regret not having a direct comparison of the photograph at this meeting, because it's all, perhaps it is subjective, but I think people should be making their own minds up by actually seeing those tiles side by side, and we've not had that today.
Yeah, you've made that point. I thought that, well, I mean, the point has been made that they are as close a match as possible, and they will weather in.
Sorry, number 2 is as close as match as possible, which is why I'm not objecting to those tiles. It's the other 4 properties where they're not a close match. That is the problem. So if they're all like at number 2, there's no issue. The fact is that the other 4 properties have not had a new tile put on like at number 2. Yeah, the tiles at number 2 are identical. They're a double lapping tile. They match closely. There's another resident done the same. They match closely. There's no problem. The problem is with the other 4 properties, 2 which we're determining today. And if you saw them side by side, you see that they do not match. And I think
thank you for that.
Wow.
I think you're repeating yourself now. I think you made that point. Moving on then, it's been moved and seconded for officers' recommendations. Any other comments, please? None. In that case, I'm afraid we're going to have to go through the voting procedure yet again. And again, I will be voting for officers' recommendations. Sandra Perks.
For officers' recommendation.
Thank you. Rhiannon Birch.
For officers' recommendation.
Gillian Bruce.
For.
Thank you. Christine Cave.
For.
Pam Drake.
For.
Anthony Ernest.
For.
Nick Hodges.
I'm abstaining, same reasons on the previous one, and I will be going down and having a look for myself because you still can't provide the photographs.
Okay, Ian Johnson.
Matt, I'll abstain.
Helen Payne.
For.
Thank you. Ian Perry. Councillor Perry. Against, thank you. Cara Stallard.
For.
Eddie Williams.
For.
And Mark Wilson.
For.
That's the same as we had before. 281. 2 abstentions, 841 against. So that's carried. And moving on to the third of these that we have before us, which is 13 Dufferin Close. Is there anything more to say, Steve?
Yeah, I'll be definitely confident we've got a photo of an accurate photo of this, which is probably, in fairness, well, in part probably to answer Councillor Perry's concerns. I mean, clearly, we're not going to be able to get scaffolding and go. I mean, this is a very representative view from the street, from Dufferin Close, and that's, comparing the adjoining property and obviously the new roof tiles on the left. So that's as comparable as you can get, and I think that's a very, very clear view. And I would also say, obviously, members, whilst we're not undertaking site visits, are entitled to turn up and view this prior to planning committee meeting, and obviously it's a public road anyway, so I assume those members that were concerned could have had the opportunity to inspect it assess it on site. But again, the same discussions as before, really. We're supportive of the change of these tiles at number 13.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Comments? Councillor Johnson.
Just briefly, just in response to the comment from the officer there, and obviously we don't know in advance what information we are going to be in receipt of and shown on the day. So, I mean, either we go back to arranging official site visits so that we can, have a proper provision of these things, or we anticipate that the questions can be answered, information provided on the day, and otherwise perhaps, defer issues.
Ian, for information, I've raised the possibility of site visits, and we are hoping to progress with that as soon as possible.
I'd just say, nevertheless, I do think that, say, in these officers' reports, we've presented the specification of the tile, and as clear as we can get, particularly in number 13 and 14, offering closer comparison between the two. So, we've done as much as we can to show the impacts of the new tile versus, the adjoining tile on the existing properties.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Perry.
Yeah, very quickly. Number 10 adjoins number 9. I'm just wondering why number 10 hasn't been brought forward to this planning committee with a photograph of that roof.
Okay, so I can come back on that. So both we've got two other applications which are at numbers 10 and numbers 12. Now, those properties have also had the roofs changed, but as part of the re-roofing, they have removed chimneys as well. So currently, we are in discussions with our housing team regarding the acceptability of the removal of those chimneys. So that is why numbers 12 and 10 have not been forwarded to committee, because we're still, and we have made some progress today, and I have been told by our housing team that they are looking to restore or rebuild those chimneys winter/spring. So at the moment, the applications, although we're not considering at the moment, are to remove those chimneys, and obviously to so those applications will have to be amended, showing those chimneys being rebuilt and the method of their reconstruction. So that's what I've been told today from our housing team.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah.
Ian?
Was there a reason for not splitting that and coming for determination on just the roof tiles of number 10 and number 12?
Because of the thing with the chimneys as well.
Well, I
more
think,
complicated.
all honesty, I think we've got better leverage in having the two elements as one. Because if it was just dealing, well, we can't approve roof tile on top of an area where there would have been a chimney, and then have deal with the chimney later, because we would have, the two are interlinked.
It's one planning application.
Yeah.
You can't consider part of a planning application without the whole of it being considered together.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on, do we have a mover and a seconder on this as well, please? Thank you, Eddie.
Happy to second.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm assuming that we need to go to a vote on this one as well. Right, as before, I vote for. Sandra?
For.
Rhiannon?
For.
Gillian?
Abstain.
Christine Cave?
For.
Andre?
For.
Anthony Ernest?
For.
Nick Hodges?
Abstain.
Ian Johnson?
Mattal, abstain.
Thank you. Helen Payne?
For.
Ian Perry?
I'm the one person who's seen it, and I will vote against.
Thank you. Kerry Stallard?
Obliged.
Eddie Williams?
For.
And Mark Wilson?
For.
Same, 281. 2 abstentions, 8-4, 1 against. So that is carried. Moving on. Does anyone need a toilet break? Nick, you do. You say you do.
No.
I think I need a lobotomy, Chairman. But I'd like a toilet break. Yeah.
Okay. Can I give you 5 minutes then? Ernest isn't back yet. No, there he is. Right, so hopefully we're all back in the room. Moving on then to the barn to the north of Home Mill Farm. I think this is Steve again.
Yeah.
And this is the one I thought I mistook earlier,
Yes.
where the application's actually been withdrawn, but the enforcement is still appropriate.
That's right. Okay, so as the chairman has just said, we've had a late matter letter from the applicant asking to withdraw the application. So the application element of what's presented to you has been withdrawn. Just another point that's mentioned in the letter that's been circulated. The applicant has said he's happy to work with the enforcement officer regarding any violations with a view to resubmitting an application in the future. The applicant has raised concerns about certain comments in the report which relate to our concern about it being for a genuine tourism use. Nevertheless, the report clearly assesses the application as a holiday let and doesn't, for example, make any suggestion that it's going to be used as a single dwelling. So I'm going to be a little bit briefer with this one. So I'll just share my screen a second. So again, this is a site, How Mill. It's near St Mary Church, the south of Cowbridge. Again, very, very close, adjoining the main road. There are no group of farm buildings located running parallel with the road. So the application itself just relates to the one building within the site. And these photos are from Google Street, which were taken in 2010, but they show the pre-existing development. This is a photo submitted by the applicant showing the barn in question, which has got a semi-collapsed roof. So what's happened is that the applicant, and this is kind of concurrent with the application, has taken the roof off. You can see the existing brick elevations, very simple, larger opening there, single door opening. The applicant has now block work infilled the larger opening to create a doorway, and he's filled in the lower half of the doorway to create a window. And that's more of a completed version. The applicant has also put a new roof on the building. There may be, obviously, you can see some repairs of block work under the wall plate, etc. Also installed very domesticated plastic windows on the front of the elevation, in addition to UPVC doors on the rear. And in addition to that, it's all the whole of the elevations have been re-rendered. So, as we discussed with Brooklands, again, this has totally changed the character of the existing building from what was a very simple red brick building with a profile sheeted roof to rendered building with modern domesticated doors and windows, of which those openings are non-original to the building. So what you're looking at would effectively appear as a modern building, as a new replacement building. Again, this building is very prominent from the road, particularly when you drive up the side of it. It's very, very visible. And again, MD11 is the key policy here that seeks to allow such conversions. But in this case, significant, again, elevations changed. The roof has been changed to a sort of a tile effect metal sheeting, all of which result in a building which one would hardly really call it a conversion. It's this whole scale sort of repair and alteration of the external fabric of the building to a point where it bears no resemblance to its former agricultural use. So on that basis, again, these are the views. This is the view from the highway adjacent to the stone wall and the grass verge. This building is very, very prominent. There are other buildings within the site which have had similar works. They are subject to a separate enforcement case. But you can see this building particularly is very, very, very prominent. So again, it fails policy MD11. So again, the recommendation is to refuse the application. Obviously, we're not considering that today, but as part of that, and for the same reasons, is to authorise enforcement action. Again, the enforcement action, similar to the previous application at Brooklands, is to reinstate the building to its original condition, so principally removing the render, therefore exposing the brick elevations, and removing the windows and doors and all areas of new external blockwork, and to remove the profile steel sheeting roof. So if all those works are done, then it take the building back pretty much to its pre-development condition. So that's probably enough for the moment. I'll pass back to you, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Hodges, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Chairman, I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation on the enforcement. It protects the council's position. I was going to call him the applicant. He's not an applicant now because he's withdrawn his application. So if he wishes to talk to our planning department whilst the enforcement action is on, I'm happy for that obviously to happen. And if we get an application in the future, we'll happily look at it. But at the moment, he's in breach, and let's enforce. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a seconder for that. Somebody second?
I'm happy to second.
Yeah, thank you. And Eddie. Yeah, I think that's the purpose of continuing with this. The enforcement is to help in the negotiations between the planning and the future applicant. So unless I see hands to anybody to the contrary, I would assume that that's carried NIMCON. Yeah, I see no one against. We can move on then to the last one on the agenda, which is the Waverley Care Centre, Plymouth Road, Penarth. And I think Ian, you're presenting on this.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. Share my screen. Yeah, so this is an application for new boundary enclosures at the Waverley Care Centre in Penarth. That's the application site on my screen there. The enclosures relate principally to the boundary adjacent to Plymouth Road, but also in part to the southern corner. Previously, hopefully this is clear enough, members. Previously, we approved a wall and railings along this boundary. Now, rather than implementing the consent, which was for a dwarf wall with railings above,
Anthony, can you mute for the minute, please?
Yep. The applicant has constructed. The applicant's constructed just railings, so there's no dwarf wall. This is a view from slightly further afield. To be completely honest, I think what's been done is probably slightly less subtle than a version that contained part wall, part railings. But even though it's different, officers are of the view that it's still acceptable in the wider context, doesn't unacceptably affect the character of the area. So the recommendation is to approve, Joe.
Thank you. And Anthony, you called us in. Do you want to speak on this?
Yes, please, Chairman. Thank you, members. Thank you, officers. The reason I've called this in is because what the photographs do not clearly show is that there are a substantial number of properties immediately opposite this fencing, the width of the road. You will see from the plans that we've had today that this is clearly a breach of the approved consent. If the approved consent had been carried out, then the walling would be broadly matching that's already in the vicinity. Now, I accept that this property, and it's a very large property, as you can see from the photographs, it's probably one of the largest buildings in Penarth. This property lies immediately outside the conservation area, but it's the width of the road we're talking about when I say outside. I think residents are concerned, those who've contacted me, is that this fencing is substantially higher than normal fencing. It's well over the standard 2 meters. A lot of the residents, and there's several hundred, I believe, now within the building, could well feel they're being locked in. The gates are closed at night. We've had issues over access to the property. That's outlined in the report as well. with ambulances coming along in the middle of the night to either drop off or collect patients, and the drivers, ambulance drivers, staff, not being able to get into the property and having to blow horns and so on to get it open. That lies outside the planning application. But we've talked a lot this evening about matching materials. We've talked about development being in accord with the neighbourhood. We talked of a house in Barry and the height of the boundary walls. This is a very tall fence. I'm not saying it's not good quality. It is, but it's well over 2 meters in height. You can see if you look at page 225, particularly in your planning report, that the building itself composes two completely different blocks. You've got a 4 or 5 story block containing patients' accommodation. You've got the newer development nearer you. You've got the fencing there, which, as I say, does not really accord with similar boundaries in the neighbourhood. There is an issue also with the side entrance, but I think Estates and Highways have addressed that, so I thank them for that. But I do simply appeal to members to stick by their principles, and you've all this evening clearly stated your principles, that you like to see development in conformity with what's going on in the general neighbourhood. And for that reason solely, I ask members to oppose officer's recommendation on the basis that the development carried out does not accord with the consents that have been previously granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Anyone else have any comments to make on this? Rhiannon.
Thank you. I would like to make the point that the reason the Waverley has such high fences and the reason that they are locked at night is because it has a large number of patients with advanced dementia, and they have had problems with people getting out onto the road during the day, during the night, whatever. And so that's why they have such security requirements there.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. And although I hear Councillor Only's observations here on this, I know that this area pretty well. I know that it's quite a mixed area in terms of different types of properties of different ages. There's a bit of infill. If you go around that area, it's not all the same, and therefore I think it's a judgment to be made on this, and I think the judgment is that we've got to think about the nature of this property, the Waverley in particular, the kind of business that it deals with in terms of lots of people with severe dementia, and we've got to bear that in mind. Obviously, a fencing like this, a sliding fencing, is ideal in this situation in lots of ways, because you need vehicles going in and out in a safe way. So actually, I would like to move officers' recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Cave. Oh, sorry, Councillor. I apologise, Christine.
That's okay.
Ian Perry had his hand up before you. I apologise.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Perry.
No
I'll come to you next.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we have planning committees and decide, because there is a fine balance to be made here. It's difficult. Obviously, someone's raised the safety issues, but there's also the conservation area and the overall aesthetics, as we discussed earlier today. So, yeah, I'm just looking at it, and you could go either way on this. It's very, very subjective. So I'll just sort of say that, and I'll pass on to Christine Cave.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Christine, then.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yes, I don't think it's a subjective point at all. I actually think they applied for planning permission with a particular fencing, and at that stage, nothing was very different from what it is now. They already knew that they had a client group that could wander, and they thought at the time that the fencing that they put in was appropriate. I do think the fencing that is there now really, for everybody else that lives in that street, is very, very unsightly. And as Councillor Anthony Ernest already pointed out, we have this evening made some decisions based on your uniformity and street view. And I do think I'm going to have to vote against officers' recommendations here.
Thank you, Councillor Kay. Councillor Hodges.
Thank you, Chairman. It is subjective. What I would say is I appreciate it's half a width of a street outside the conservation area, but if you look at a couple of the pictures that are there in the report, not only has the home itself, the development, got a modern aspect to a good chunk of it there, but right behind it is a modern, well, not so modern, but a huge block of flats, which I think defeat the object of how close it is to it. There you go.
Can I just point out that the huge block of flats are actually part of the Waverley?
Well, yeah, but you know, it is what it is. I mean, it's a huge and it's a big area sort of thing. What I would say is, in general, of some of the items we've had tonight and some of the ones I suspect we'll be getting increasing amounts of in the future, about whether people actually comply with the planning applications they get or do things with no permissions, is that I think there is a charge towards people using less expensive materials, more inferior materials, cheaper looks, less style, and this, that, and the other. And I think that's the cost of living crisis that we're all going through, is doing that. So I think we've got to be mindful, not only of that, but also in defending the very look, heritage, and style of our county. The area there in this application, I understand security. I see less of an issue with this one. It's a shame when people don't comply with the applications they get and even show us beautiful pictures of what they were going to do and then don't do it. But I'm less hung up about this one, Chairman. But I'm happy to hear any more conversations on it.
Thank you, Councillor Hodges. Councillor Robinson. Not Councillor. I just promoted you again, Ian. Ian, thank you. You want to come back?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. I think just wanted to say, I think that one of the photos that Councillor Ernest referred to, I think it probably shows the fence and its, or the railings and its worst, guys, because when the gate is open and it kind of double banks in sections, it looks heavier, you know, and less kind of visually permeable than would be most of the time when it's closed. You know, fair points from Councillor Hodges and Councillor Perry. I think we have to look at these case by case. We're never going to adopt the approach that it has to be unacceptable simply because it doesn't comply with an earlier permission. There's a range of things that can be acceptable on most sites, and just because it's not the same, in some cases it will be worse and unacceptable and we'll refuse it. In this case, our view is, yes, it doesn't comply with it, but it's one of those ones where it's different but not that bad. As I said before, I think it's probably, I think the previous approval looks slightly better, but you know, a bit like an extension on a house, you might get one permission and then get permission for something slightly different. So yeah, it is a judgment case. I think it's subjective. You might find some people that don't think it looks that great, but on balance, we think it complies with policy and shouldn't be refused.
Okay, so sparing Councillor Payne, you've got your hand up.
I just clarify, are they any part of these gates electric, or are they just sliding?
I don't know, but I wouldn't want us to put too much weight on that in the.
I'm not sure. I can't help you with that, Chairman. I'm afraid I don't know.
Okay, just in terms of safety.
I think the key point with the gates is that they made earlier that if there are issues with, you know, vehicles, etc., that would be the case potentially with any gate whatsoever. So that's fairly.
Yeah, I'm more worried about children than vehicles.
Just to come in at that point, that I have to say that wouldn't be a planning matter. That's a health and safety. It's a health and safety issue. So we wouldn't get involved in issues of, you know, you're quite right to raise that, Councillor Payne, because obviously we had some horrific stories of electric gates doing terrible things to youngsters and others. And of course, with regard to this situation with Alzheimer's sufferers here as well, it could be the same.
Yeah.
But that would be a matter for health and safety, not for the planning system.
Okay, thanks.
Right. All right, I've got Councillor Williams as his hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If it hasn't been done already, I think we've discussed this enough. So can I move the officer's recommendations, please?
I think it was actually. I think Mark,
Chairman, do I get the right to reply as the...
well, it isn't a matter of right to reply.
Well, the right to sum up then, if you like.
You can, yeah, okay. You can briefly, I think, yeah.
Chairman, I'm always brief, as you know. I'm grateful to members for looking at the issues. I'm slightly disappointed that a couple of fellow Penarth members don't necessarily agree, but that's their prerogative. If you actually look at the photographs on page 225, you can see the length of the extent of those railings at the top part of Lower Plymouth Road. I should say that the parking usually is far greater than that, vehicles parked either side. And I was slightly concerned to hear from Councillor Wilson that the idea of the gates is to keep patients locked inside rather than allowing visitors to go in. That's perhaps a slightly unfortunate remark, which I'm sure we can overlook. So, Chairman, once again, thank you to members. And as I say, I move that officers' recommendations be not approved. Thank you.
Well, we have two motions that actually negate each other.
Yes,
I think Councillor Williams has been seconded. If we vote, then we will be voting either for or against officers' recommendations. So it works. And I think Councillor Wilson's remark earlier, not to speak for him, but it was, and Councillor Birch, was that the patients in the nursing home, some of them do wander, they do have dementia, and it's for their protection rather than for their imprisonment. Right, we will go to the vote because we don't have consensus, and I will be voting for officers' recommendations. Councillor Perks.
For officers' recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Birch.
For officers' recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Bruce.
Against.
Councillor Cave.
Against.
Councillor Drake.
For officers' recommendations.
Councillor Ernest.
Against.
Councillor Hodges.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Applied. In favour.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Stallard.
Applied.
Councillor Williams.
For.
And Councillor Wilson.
For.
Thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4. 7. So let's make that 10-4 in favour. And that being the last matter on the agenda, and I've not been notified.
Could you tell us, Chairman, how many were against?
4. I did say 10-4.
Oh, 10, 10.
10-4
Yep.
and 4 against. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm
Just,
grateful.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, either that or I was calling it some American police thing. In that case, there being no other business, thank you all for your indulgence in what has actually been a very long meeting, and we'll see this committee after recess. Thank you all. Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank
Good
you.
night,
Bye.
everybody. Good night.
Good night.